All right, welcome. Good evening. The meeting of the February 22nd, 2023 for the Murrieta Planning Commission is now called to order at 6 p.m. Madam Secretary, would you please call roll for a determination of quorum?
Commissioner Bruman. Here. Commissioner Wojcik. Here. Commissioner Harlan.
Here.
Vice Chair Fisher. Here. Chair LaPaglia.
Here.
Let the record reflect all members are present.
Thank you. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Harlan? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. We'll now move on to the approval of the agenda. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
Seeing none.
Thank you. I'd like to call roll for a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda.
Commissioner Bruman.
Or do we need to call a motion for that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need to call for a motion in a second, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a motion in a second for tonight's agenda?
Move approval.
Thank you. And I'll second. Madam Secretary, now we'll do the roll call.
Commissioner Bruman.
Motion approved.
Commissioner Wojcik.
Aye.
Commissioner Harlan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Fisher.
Aye.
Chair LaPaglia.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. At this time, we'll take public comments. Any person may address the Planning Commission on any subject pertaining to city business which does not relate to any item listed on tonight's agenda. Normally, no action may be considered or taken by the Planning Commission on any matter not listed on the agenda, and speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Madam Secretary, do we have any non-agenda public comments tonight?
Seeing none.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll now move on to the approval of the minutes. We will approve the minutes from December 12th, 2022 and January 11th, 2023 of the regular Planning Commission meeting as presented. Madam Secretary, are there any members of the public requesting to speak on behalf of the approval of the last 2 minutes?
Seeing none.
Okay, at this time, I'll call for a motion and a second to approve the minutes. And with that, I'll make a motion because Madam Secretary and I had to make a couple small adjustments to the minutes from January 11th, 2023. Just not recognizing that Commissioner Lavelle and Commissioner King were present, which I believe they were, correct, Madam Secretary?
Correct.
So those are the only corrections. And with that, I'll make a motion to approve the rest of December 12th and January 11th.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, can you please do a roll call vote?
Commissioner Bruman.
Just as a point, I wasn't here that meeting. Am I able to?
So you have 2 options. I don't know if you watched and reviewed the meeting independently and can then vote to approve or deny if the minutes are consistent with what you watched and experienced. But if not, then the typical course of action would be to abstain.
Then I'll abstain. I didn't watch it.
Commissioner Wojcik.
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Harlan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Fisher.
Aye.
Chair LaPaglia.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously, or motion carries, passes 3-0.
Thank you. We'll now move on to tonight's public hearing. The public hearing tonight is Development Plan Permit 2022-2601, the Sandstone Valley Apartments. Are there any members of the Planning Commission that wish to abstain or recuse themselves from tonight's item? And I could just take a nod of heads because I don't believe we do. Staff, may we please have the staff report for tonight's public hearing item?
Thank you, Chair LaPaglia, Vice Chairman Fisher, and Commissioners. My name is Jarrett Ramaya with the Planning Department. joined here tonight by Carl Steele, Senior Planner with the Planning Division. We're going to first go over some state law that's applicable to tonight's project, and then we're going to jump into the proposal. So I just want to start off with, there's going to be two segments of this presentation this evening. First, we're providing background on the Housing Accountability Act. It was passed in 1982, where housing production had become a statewide issue as it is today. It set the stage for the following. Housing developments cannot be denied if it complies with all applicable objective general plan, zoning, and subdivision standards and criteria. Denial could only occur under specific circumstances, for example, a specific adverse effect as defined by the statute. In 2017, California Senate Bill 167 and Assembly Bills AB 678 and AB 1515 were passed and signed into law by the governor. Collectively known as the Housing Accountability Act, or HAA, they became effective January 1st, 2018. What did it do? It tightened the definition of what's called objective standards. This means that a project is reviewed against a uniformly known benchmark or criteria. What it did was it increased the burden of proof on jurisdictions that rejected a housing project. But I wanted to note that objectivity is the key with state law. The HAA also increased fines and increased authority for the court to order a housing project to be approved, implemented a minimum $10,000 per housing unit fine, with a court having the authority to directly approve a project on behalf of a jurisdiction. If a local jurisdiction acted in bad faith when rejecting a housing development, the applicable fines increase. Next is the housing crisis of 2019, also known as the Senate Bill 330, or SB 330 as we know it. The objective for this law was the need to reduce the time it takes to approve housing developments in California in response to the shortage of statewide housing production, somewhere between 70,000 and 110,000 units annually. SB 330 also created a new preliminary application process, which we have into effect. It provides a standardized list of questions for an applicant and then qualifies them for timing so that they can lock into the fees and the conditions that are rendered at the time of review. In addition, SB 330 has had an effect on shortening the processing timeframes for a project. To note for this evening, jurisdictions only have 60 days to act when you've processed it under the CEQA documentation and notice of exemption or mitigated negative deck. Tonight we have a notice of exemption, so we do have a 60-day clock that we're within. Also, SB 330 mandates that no more than 5 public meetings occur for any specific housing project. There's more with SB 330. Density of a site cannot be reduced unless required to address a specific adverse impact on public health or safety, and there's no feasible method to satisfactorily mitigate or avoid this specific adverse impact. There's a specific finding per state law on that. Prohibits any moratorium that would result in the net downzoning that limits the number of permits to be issued or otherwise reduces housing or overall population. For a housing development project in Murrieta, both the HAA and Housing Crisis Act are both factors in our review. Objective standards, such as does the project meet the zoning criteria, such as density, height, setbacks? These are key when reviewing this type of project and rendering a decision. Financial and legal implications could be a factor if not followed, meaning that a city could face potential fines and legal orders by a court. The HAA also provides a tree, which is on the screen in front of you. When staff go through this tree, if you will, it ends up where it says project cannot be denied without potential HAA violation. So I wanted to just underscore that under state law, the way staff has evaluated the project, we want to be very clear on the ramifications with this evening's item before you. So I just wanted to put on the floor the state law. Not a lot of folks have been tracking this because they're not planners and professionals like you in the room. And even if we have been tracking it, the amount of new state law in the last few years alone has been very daunting, not only for staff, but for the public as well. And we're seeing more housing law already being proposed this year. And so we're tracking that in our legislative group. And as always, we do try at the staff level to push back on law as it's being written. But once it gets signed into law in October by the governor, we have to obey state law. What I'll do now is introduce the project in the next series of slides, but I wanted to check in if there has any questions so far, but I can continue. So on the screen, we're going to begin talking about the project. This is an aerial photo of the project site. In the shaded orange, if you will, that's the 3 parcels that are under the 96-unit project. This is on Hawthorne, just a little bit down from Adams Avenue. Here's a view of the plot plan, if you will. We have 4 buildings, a community building, parking areas, and landscaping areas. And I'll get into more detail on those. There's gonna be 4 primary buildings with 24 units each. They do have outdoor patios and balconies. They have on-site amenities like a community building that I'll go into more detail shortly. This is another view of the plot plan. One thing to note is that the north arrow, if you will, should be to the left. So it's a little bit, the image is sideways, if you will. But everything other than the frontage on Hawthorne will have a 6-foot solid wall around the project site. Beyond that will be a landscape zone. Then you'll have the parking areas, drive lane aisle, more parking, and then the units. But I just want to lay out how the site is being proposed here. This is a west elevation of the site. What you'll notice is the applicant is attempting to place the project within the existing topography of the property, and that's why I wanted to show you this side view. Here's a rendering of the community building. Here are typical floor plans for the 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And we'll go into project amenities. We do have a 1-story community building. We have tot lot and barbecue areas. We have walkways and other shaded areas for the on-site residents. The community building will have a number of rooms. They have laundry, multi-purpose, computer, offices, lobby, and a package room, including bathrooms. Just to get in more detail about the community building is to provide services for the on-site residents. This would include different types of programs, and they can be done in that community room that you saw in the image. I'll go into more detail about the programs for school-aged children. They do have before and after programs for school children. Those would include sports and fitness, camps, arts education. There's also, the community room itself is a safe place for the students to be in. I'd like to talk about the property manager's responsibilities because I think, we received about 25 letters of concern from the community. I think the theme of those concerns was, would the project lead to an increase in crime? Would the project increase traffic? There was a number of comments that I'd like to walk you through, but I think crime was the #1 concern for the community. So I wanted to talk about how the property manager, what kinds of responsibilities and roles do they play? Because that's a centroid to making sure that they maintain a safe site. They do have CRP Affordable, who's the applicant. They have other projects in the San Diego and other areas. They do have a track record that they're sharing about how careful they are in reviewing applications that would come in for residents to live at this facility. They do have a verification of their rental history. They need to make sure that there's adequate deposit placed on file, and I have a number of other points that I'll add to that. One is that any tenant they have to have a job, #1. They have to demonstrate income. but they also have to show that they have 5 years free of eviction-free rental history, that they have not had non-sufficient fund checks returned to the property manager, and that they haven't had any other instances in their rental history that would cause, damage to sites or unruly behavior. They tend to try to, research and call the people to verify what type of person are they working with or family. They do background checks for criminal convictions. They do run credit and rental history checks. And if they find that an applicant or proposed tenant doesn't meet their criteria, they're simply not allowed to reside at that community. And so I do go back to the property manager. They do have a critical role in making sure that they carefully assess the folks that would be living here. And they also manage those folks as well as the property. But I wanted to detail some of the points that the property manager would be responsible for. When we take a project in for review, it's not just planning that reviews it. We do route that to traffic, engineering, fire, building and safety, and our community services group. On this project, we did have the Murrieta Police Department review, evaluate, and condition the project. There's a number of things like having a security system, a video camera system, deadbolts, and clearing of vegetation on site so that you don't have unsafe areas. But I just wanted to underscore that the property manager is really responsible for the review and maintenance. But before we approve a project, we do make sure that all of the departments for the city do properly review the project itself. And with that, if you look at how the on-site services are, the programs, the opportunities, the property manager carefully screening, and the review and conditioning by our Murrieta Police Department, at the staff level, we do not see that this would lead to an increase in crime. But I know that's a very key point for the immediate community. So I just want to underscore that. Traffic is also a theme of concern, which is legitimate. We always want to make sure that any new project, we look at the volume of traffic and also the safety of the area. We did have our traffic engineer and our engineering team review this for circulation. Adams Avenue does operate at an acceptable level. And we have properly conditioned the project so that Hawthorne, the primary road, is conditioned to make that full improvements. Just to go back to the plot plan, there was another concern about fire safety from a couple of commenters. So I wanted to show this slide where we have a dedicated fire lane that would go through the site. We don't have gates proposed at the entrances, but we have 2 access driveways along Hawthorne. We have a complete free fire lane for the fire trucks so they can stage on the peripheral levels. We have conditions so that has adequate egress and ingress from the site. And we have threaded with the water district to make sure that the applicant can achieve adequate minimum water pressure for the fire suppression system, which includes the automatic fire sprinklers and the fire hydrants. Parking was another legitimate concern from the neighbors. The way state law works on affordable housing projects is there's a minimum threshold. The way this computes is that although they're providing 137 spaces, only 135 are required by state law. There are allowances for reduction when you're proposing affordable, and that comes straight from state law, that allowance to do that. So with any project, we have the construction phase where it's a little bit louder, right? Things are moving around and we have equipment, we got grading, concrete pouring, then you go vertical. And then you have the operational phase where people are living there. The project was subjected to a noise assessment study. In that assessment, the modeling concludes that during both phases, there would not be an exceedance of our noise requirements in our development code. Another key concern from the community was, when did this become zoned for multifamily? I think there was a lot of folks that were caught off guard by the existing zoning. So I want to walk you through a couple of slides on the history of zoning for this area. So if we go back to 1999, the area was zoned mixed use, MU3, and that did allow for multifamily up to 18 dwelling units per acre. In 2011, City Council updated the mapping and that was changed to multi-use, which allows between 15 and 18 dwelling units per acre. So just want to underscore, since 1999, there has been the allowance for an applicant to propose multifamily at the same density of today. Here's some of the mapping that supports that in purple within the green circle. 3 of the properties for tonight are within that. That shows that in 1999 from the general plan map itself, that's what was approved. And here's the map from 2011. So in that deeper brown, that's the MF2 that we have to this day. Who are we talking about? Who's affordable? Well, in this area, that means an annual income between $44,000 and $70,400. If you take a look at the types of professions that qualify in that category, I've listed them on the slide. But I think that's an important point, is that this isn't a project for people with no jobs. It's a project for workforce production. It's people that have jobs. It's just they happen to be in a certain income category. So I just wanted to share the screen that when we step back and look at who could qualify, it's quite an interesting spectrum of professionals I think we see all day long. We pump gas next to them. We're in the shopping malls next to them. These are the fabric of our community. So I just want to underscore, who are we talking about? We're talking about families and individuals that make between $44,000 and $70,000 a year. So some folks asked, why 96 units if I'm counting 15 to 18 DU per acre? So under state law, density bonus law, when you do propose affordable units, you do get a little bit of an uptick. If you propose 100% affordable housing projects, you get an 80% uptick in your density. The applicant could have gone as high as 116 units. They want to make sure everything's balanced with setbacks, parking, and everything else. So they decided to design a project at 96 units. But I want to give you some background as to how state law applies for density bonus. So you're granted more units than you typically would have. That's at the state level. The local can't really comment or touch that. Also with state law, if you do provide affordable housing, you get up to 4 waivers, concessions, incentives. With 100%, you get all 4. And so what I'm listing is the 4 concessions that the applicant has requested. It's a reduction in private open space, reduced parking lot shading, reduced tree spacing within parking areas, and a reduced parcel size. So the rule is that when an applicant provides those recommendations, we would have to have an economic analysis to push back on that. And what the goal is to help things that might cost out or affect the ability for a project to be approved. These are typical concessions that I've seen with other projects. They didn't go for parking because the state law requires them a minimum of 135, but that's usually what we see is the first thing is for parking, but they have a minimum requirement under state law for that. And to get closer to a closing, as I said earlier, we are seeing a very active Sacramento. Back in before COVID, Colin and I attended a conference in Santa Barbara, and the keynote speaker was Senator Wiener. And him and a lot of other folks have been behind some of these changes. And I was stunned in listening to him when he says, hey, you planners, for a long time you've been married to single family residential and you drove this state into the ditch. And I was stunned at hearing that because as a planner, I'd always thought like I was a positive change agent, not a negative one. But I took those tea leaves away from that meeting. And I said, wow, there's a tremendous change in where we're going with housing. Sacramento feels that they need to provide more housing supply. And in doing that, I think they've taken away some authority that your hearing body in the past may have had some flexibility, but for today, that has been removed, has been denuded. So I just wanted to cautiously and carefully explain that to you, the depths of state law. And even with that, I would like to say that staff works earnestly to make sure we have the best possible project to propose to you. In the last week or so, we've received 2 legal letters, one from YIMBY Law and one from Myers-Nave. The point of these two letters is to underscore the significance of state law and how the local authorities might not have much to work with. From staff's perspective, the project is consistent with the zoning, is consistent with the general plan, does comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. We have exempted, or we're proposing to exempt the project based upon the state criteria. It does occur within our city limits. It's below 5 acres. It doesn't have endangered, rare, or threatened species. From our review and the technical studies that support it, there's no significant adverse impacts on traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality. In working with the Water and Sewer District, we feel that adequate services can be provided to the property. And just saying CEQA exemption, I want to be careful there. We did ask the applicant to provide a number of technical studies to support that. We have a VMT memo, hydro, stormwater, fault evaluation, burning owl, jurisdictional waters, air quality, noise, geotech, phase 1 environmental site assessment, and water and sewer confirmation. So I did want to just walk you through that. I believe that we've done a good deep dive on the CEQA side of this project, and that's how I was able to land on determining that a notice of exemption is applicable to tonight's project. Recommendation from staff to the Planning Commission is to consider and approve the notice of exemption for infill development, section 15332, pursuant to the guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and adopt the resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Murrieta approving Development Plan Permit 2022-2601 for a 96-unit multifamily project located northeast of the intersection of Adams Avenue and Hawthorne Street, based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A, as found in Attachment 1. And in closing, Commission, we do have staff from Murrieta Fire and Rescue, Engineering Department, Police Department, and our traffic engineering to support. And again, I'm sitting here with Carl Steele from our Planning Division. And so with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramaya, for the in-depth overview of what we're up against tonight. At this time, we'll take questions from the commission to members of the staff. If we have any questions for staff, and Commissioner Wojciech, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First off, is the photos that we saw, the apartment buildings, are those pretty much what the final will look like? Or is that going to be subject to change? I mean, to me, if I'm being polite, it looks like a dorm. If I want to be mean-spirited, it looks like a prison. There's nothing soft about it. My daughter goes to college, and it looks like a building she'd live in. So is that the final, or are there going to be some changes there?
No, thank you, Commissioner. Good point. That's why I asked for this rendering, because I felt like the plan set that we got didn't give it that pop. I think what you can see from this image is that it does have some articulation, some depth, some recessing. What we have asked the applicant to do is Carl and our team is working on our multifamily design guidelines checklist that has, we're developing key architectural designs to choose from. I've asked the applicant to voluntarily come back through that process so that we can put some bells and whistles on this design. But I agree with your statement. We are focusing on that with the applicant right now. But for the litmus test under state law, I want to be careful not to get into subjectivity on that.
I would add too, I mean, it is a modern style, which is a style we're considering in the design guidelines. And we've talked about allowing that style in the city with the commission before in the workshop last year.
Well, it definitely doesn't fit this area, though. Go ahead.
It could be softer. That's just I don't know if I'm going there because I'm doing an 8-year sentence, or if I'm going there because I'm going to outpatient surgery, and that's where I'm getting dropped off at for my, it just doesn't look, if I pull up there, it doesn't look like home. So just food for thought.
The point is well taken.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
So I did look at the government code regarding parking, 65-915. My understanding is, under our ordinance, assuming this didn't fall under HCA, that it's going to, it would require normally about 198 parking spots. Is that
That's about the
fairly-
range, I think.
fairly
it is.
accurate?
Yeah, if a normal project, yeah.
And because of the type of the project this is, it's going to have 135 or 137 parking spots. My question would be, there's 96 units. No one's ever going to be able to park in their parking lot if they live there. And they're going to have to park on the streets or somewhere else. And I'm thinking, if I'm a single mom with a baby, I have to walk a block or two because I can't get a parking spot because there's not going to be enough parking spots. Can that be a factor in determining whether or not we could look at the amount of parking? Because I guess the statute, in my opinion, is not well reasoned.
Well, Joe, I would say that with the development code, you're not allowed as an applicant to park off or on street. You have to accommodate all of your parking on site. That will be a responsibility for the property manager for CRP Affordable to make sure that all of their residents have the number of vehicles assigned to their agreement and that they're parking on site consistent with the development code. If we find that there's people parking off site, that would be a violation of their terms with the city, as I understand it. But to me, is we'd go back to the property manager and find out, why are your residents not parking on site? That would be, I think, the test for us, Joe.
But
Can I mention too, we talked about this with the Adams Avenue hearing last year. Some of the commissioners will recall that that project was also a density bonus project, 200 units. It was underparked, considering with the existing parking requirements we have. Same thing, the applicant was using the density bonus parking provisions to get a reduction. And we had the same discussion. Basically, spaces are typically assigned to each unit, and that's what CRP Affordable would assumingly do. And then they would manage that as part of their property management, manage the parking situation. That's what they do. We had the same discussion on that project. And the mechanism that gets the reduction is the density bonus law. And the reduction in parking and density bonus has been in there for decades. They've just amped up the reduction in recent years with some of the changes, but there's always been the ability to do a parking reduction under density bonus.
And I understand this density bonus law. To me, it's a 600-pound gorilla on our back. It's just, it is what it is, right? But I'm looking at the practical side of it, thinking, okay, you got 96 units, 135 parking spots. I think this is destined from failure from the beginning because there's just not going to be enough parking. And once you build the parking lot, you built the parking lot. You can't add to it, right? You can't cut the parking spots in half to increase it. So I'm just thinking, has anybody thought that far in advance just to think, okay, if I assign every apartment unit one parking spot, I've taken up 96 spots. Then you have your handicap spots, you're gonna have some visitor parking, but you're gonna have some units that are gonna have 2 cars. So where's that second car gonna go?
I think we might be forecasting at this point, which I want to be careful. I'd like to bring this back to objectivity. Based upon the information from the technical study, we have no reason to believe that people would be parking off site. The property manager would be responsible for ensuring that residents park on site. If there's an issue, that's where we would be brought back in as staff.
So I guess if people park off site, what's our remedy?
Typically, for those types of situations, we get a call to our code enforcement. Code enforcement comes to us because it'd be technically a planning project. And we would have to go and then meet with CRP Affordable and sit down immediately and say, what's going on here? And then find out how they can fix that issue.
It's hard to tell from the map, but I know it's west. This project is west from the intersection of Jefferson and Murrieta Hot Springs. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Is there any potential someday in the future that Murrieta Hot Springs is going to punch all the way through to this project?
Yes, actually, it's on our Circulation Element Road. Up until last year, we had an applicant doing an industrial type of project. It was quite large. It was at Murrieta Hot Springs Road in Jefferson on the opposite side of this one. That applicant was designing a punch-through road that would have met at this property corners. The applicant withdrew, but if we ever get another applicant on that project site, depending upon the scale of their impacts and their traffic study, typically that would come and match that road.
So in the traffic study, I guess, was that taken into consideration? Because to me, I work in Temecula, so I drive Jefferson on the way home, and that intersection's always busy, especially rush hour. We're going to add this project that's going to impact it, plus there's other vacant land right there. I have no idea what's going there in the future. So is that going to be an issue, I guess?
I would say that the cost to remove that hill, if you will, because you see the county storage facility up on one side, you're talking about 24 feet of DG vertical. So what we were dealing with that person, they have an engineered wall to create the area for that road. It could be up to about $1 million for that improvement. It's a significant amount of dirt to widen or excavate to widen. And then you have an engineered wall on one side. It would take a project of a larger scale to do that. That was a distribution type of facility, trucks in and out. But if we ever see another project, depending on their traffic study and their impacts, most likely that will come back on the plate.
Okay.
I would add to that too, from holistically, from a general plan standpoint, this whole block that you see there is zoned and designated multifamily too. So in the general plan, we anticipate a lot of traffic because eventually build out of the general plan would anticipate a lot of units within this block, not just on this site. So from a VMD standpoint, we anticipate there to be a lot of traffic here, and that's accounted for in the general plan. It's not something not accounted for. It's something we anticipate.
Okay, thank you. Going to page 7 of the staff report has the table 2, in which we have the development feature. I don't know if you want to put it up on the screen, but it's the development feature. The second column is the multifamily 2 standards, and then the project detail. The minimum parcel size under multifamily 2 standards is 5 acres, but as one of the waivers, they asked for higher density on this project, and so this project has the 3.6 acres, which is about more than a 25% reduction over what the typical standard would be. Is there, I couldn't find how dense they can make the project based under current government code.
Well, so one thing just to mention on the lot size, just a side item, the 5 acre lot size is something that in the housing element, we've been told by HCD we have to reduce. So we're not going to have the 5 acre lot size pretty soon anyway. So that's a side note. But existing parcels that are legal lots don't have to meet the lot size. You can still build on the lot if it's a legal lot. It doesn't have to meet the minimum parcel size. The parcel size really comes into effect if you're talking about subdividing. So in this case, I don't know if they intend to subdivide maybe and finance each building separately. In that case, then it is advantageous to lower the lot size, but otherwise it doesn't really play in as much of a factor. So it's a relatively innocuous request to change it. And like I said, staff's planning to change the lot sizes in the multifamily anyway. We're the only jurisdiction in the county that I'm aware of that has anything over an acre for a minimum lot size in multifamily. It's really, we're an anomaly with the 5 acre lot size. It's really strange.
Okay. And then on page 8 in the report, there's different services that are going to be offered at the project. They talk about crime prevention. I think there was somewhere I read that they would join, can't remember the name of the local organization they would belong to with the city, partner with the city for crime prevention.
Yeah, there's the multifamily crime-free housing program, which I've just heard. I think based upon later on, we can bring up our police department on that one. But even if that's not still in place, the applicant themselves participates in neighborhood watch programs and other things. But yeah, we can add more to that, Joe.
Okay, so I read the letter from the applicant's attorney, and they attached some reports about crime, and basically crime doesn't happen in apartments, and it's a utopia, blah blah blah. I don't buy it, and the reason I don't buy it is I'm not stupid. I mean, I know where crime happens, and I know there's more crime in apartments than single-family residential neighborhoods, and I'll believe that to the grave. But with that being said, they talk about crime prevention, and I'll talk about joining this particular organization. And my question is, let's say they don't. Do we have a remedy?
Well, that's not based upon their principles. I think they're built to make sure that they're always threading with the community and local enforcement agencies. But again, I think what you're talking about is after constructed and occupied, what if we see an uptick in crime? What are we going to do? And I think that's where planning will probably have to thread with CRP Affordable, including police department, and get all hands on deck. That's working for a city that's one of the safest in the country. Believe me, I'm interested in a safe place. I grew up in apartments. I grew up in tough parts of town. I know exactly what that's like. I've gone to tough schools. I don't want that for anybody in Murrieta. But that's why I take my job seriously, and I would only back this job up if I knew that we had the wherewithal as a city to accommodate our own families. But it's a good point, Joe. I don't actually look at those technical things any other way than it's peer versus peer. I look at, do we have a company that has an effective property manager? Do we have staff that can be effective in coming back and enforcing what they've agreed to? But Joe, I think those are some of the nuances and concerns we all have as family members and professionals is, are we making the right decision? From the safety aspect of the community, again, I'm not seeing anything that would lead to an unsafe, adverse impact with this project. And I do look at it from the lens of a father of a kid going to school, a professional, buying property in this town, making an investment. Those are all real things. Those are all concerns that I think are valid. But I'm here with planning interpretations, and I got to take those hats off. But I would say that all of us in the department think on those levels. It's just that we communicate in our development code, general plan, and state law expectations.
And I appreciate that answer, and we concur. I mean, we want to see what's best for the community. My whole world, though, is about the what ifs. And what I'm always concerned about is I came from a community that had a lot of low-income housing, apartments and things like that. These people come in, they promise the universe. And some are well-intentioned, others aren't. Even those that are well-intentioned, at some point they sell the property, it goes to an investment REIT, some New York firm, out-of-town landlords, they can give a rat's what happens in our community. And all of a sudden it gets dilapidated, they're not doing things, and then next thing you find out, bottom line, as long as they're getting paid, they don't care, right? Because they're not vested in the community. And so I'm kind of looking at this long term. I'm not saying that the applicant's not well-intentioned. I assume they are. But there's a bunch of other services that they're promising. They're talking about bringing in on-site services for ESL. I think that's great. Resume writing. I think that's fantastic. Health and wellness training, discussion groups, food cultivation preparation programs. Some of this sounds like a pipe dream to me. I'm not sure they're going to offer all this, but let's assume they do. They talk about, we're going to select residents and we're going to select nobody but the best, okay? No crime, no records, haven't been evicted in 5 years, all this wonderful stuff. And at the end of the day, that's a nice promise to make, but I guess my question is, and maybe they're motivated to make sure that happens because they're in it for the money. They want to make sure they have good tenants, but not all of them are that way. At the end of the day, my question would be, they're making all these promises, but what's our enforcement mechanism to make sure that happens? Because if we don't have an enforcement mechanism, then isn't this just empty promises?
Well, and Carl can help me out here we have conditioned the project so that they enter into a housing agreement with the city. That agreement specifies their role with maintenance of the property. Recently, we had an investor want to jump out of one of our existing facilities. The existing affordable housing provider is taking 100% lead on that one. So I do believe we have in the housing agreement those types of measures, but Carl, I'll beg for your help on that one.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, Joe, so we will have a regulatory agreement between the city's housing authority and the property that will be in place in perpetuity as long as the units are affordable units. They will report to our housing authority, which is me here at City Hall, every year. We monitor the units, they report on the units that goes into our annual report to the state. And part of that is maintenance of the property, programs, what are they doing? And we can follow up on that if we see, as Jared alluded to, if we see issues, whether it be code enforcement, that's one thing, police, that's one thing, or just from staff's end, that's one thing. Like Jared said, if something's going wrong with their financing, the county can help too. We, at times, will reach out and bring in the county because the county has a bigger pot of money sometimes to play with, and we can help them refinance. A lot of these properties, CRP Affordable can tell you more about it, but they do change hands, as you alluded to. And there's times when they do what's called resyndication, and they do different loans and different ways of rehabbing the property, and the city can help with that. And we've done that. We did that across the street with the Monte Vista project, which most people don't know. We have affordable housing literally across the street from where we are right now, and it's very nice. So yeah, we do those kind of things all the time. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, and that the regulatory agreement's there between the city and the project to help with that.
So just so I can go to bed peacefully tonight, this list on page 8 and 9 that they say we're gonna promise this, and this, you're telling me that we could put that into an enforceable agreement so they follow through on that, and that will be in perpetuity as long as it's this type of housing. And if they violate it, we're entitled to fine them, or what's our remedy?
I think we'd have to look at that. I don't know that I'd want to swear in blood right now what the city's
Okay.
going to do, but we could look at that with the regulatory agreement. That's something we do with these projects is we prepare a regulatory agreement with the city attorney, and we can work with CRP Affordable on that to put specific language in there if that's a concern of the commission.
Well, I guess, because, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what they told you guys. This isn't what you're telling them to do, correct?
Well, Commissioner, I think when the applicant has an opportunity to answer some questions to your commission, I think that would be an apt time to bring that up.
Okay.
If there's some gaps, would they be voluntarily able to offer that? I think there's some conversation there that I think would be beneficial.
But just so I'm clear, though, this is stuff that they came up with, not what you came up with.
The information I took was from their guidelines. This is how but I want to narrow this. This is how their property manager operates. Based upon their existing facilities. So I want to give deference back to the applicant. But yeah, this list came specifically from them to show good faith that they do step up and they do moderate their role with these housing projects.
Yeah, I would expect if they came up with the list, then they'd have no problem honoring it. Just my observation.
No, I word for word,
Yeah.
I cut and pasted what they showed me. So.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move over to Commissioner Verman. Any questions for staff right now?
I do have several, and I'd just like to echo some of Commissioner Wojciech's statements and assessments. The look of the building, and just as kind of maybe a suggestion to the applicant, especially on that side of town. I don't know if that's something that we as a city can look at, but these type of design standards, it would seem to me that on the west side of town would be more apropos with a craftsman's type of a design standard. What they're proposing, or at least the design, looks like something more that would be maybe built somewhere in the center of town, off of Murrieta Hot Springs Road or something like that. Your assessment also in the public safety side of it, and I can just give my perspective, 37 years in law enforcement. I think it's not only a crime aspect. I know the applicant attached a study when it comes to crime. Those are documented crimes and things like that. But one of the things that it's often missed is just general law enforcement calls for service. And so a lot of times different developments, especially large-scale multi-housing projects, those type of things like that. With the density comes with a lot of different quality of life issues and things like that. So it does impact the police department calls for service on several different levels, whether they're responding there just on general disputes, those type of things like that, or actual crime. But I do think that there are some things, I do appreciate Sergeant Therian, what you've done with some of the conditions of approval, putting in here to kind of, increase or harden the target, if you will. But I will suggest a few other things that maybe the applicant kind of take into consideration. But questions of staff. I just want to be assured that right now we're talking 96 units, and of course the applicant says they could build 117. You say 116 units. At some point in time, they can't change that. If we were to approve this project, they couldn't come back and somehow modify that at another time. They can't. It's not a flexible target saying, "Hey, look, we've changed. The market conditions have changed, or what have you. So therefore, we're gonna change."
Commissioner Buhrman, an applicant can propose on any project to come back and make a change. It's whether or not staff could support that change. The limiting things that we still have local control on are like setbacks and landscape percentage. So those are good deciding factors. But I do want to be clear that if there was new additional changes in state law, things like that are out of our control, we just don't know what the future sees. But typically an applicant would have to modify their permit. This is a development plan permit, technically a director's decision. So if they were to modify it, we'd have to see what that modification impact would be. So what is it adding 20 units? How many traffic trips? Is there a setback conformance? Is the water and utility services adequate for that? Do they have enough photovoltaic, a draw to produce those units? So there's quite a lot that they would have to demonstrate. But typically, once a project has received approval and has been built, it's rare to see them come back. We do see sometimes folks will come back with like an accessory dwelling unit or a junior dwelling unit on some of these project sites, but it's usually one or two, not a significant increase of the site. But I don't anticipate any changes coming back if approved and if constructed.
So I guess where I'm going is I don't want to see some type of a bait and switch, if you will. Is that if it's, it comes to us as 96 units and then it's 106, maybe not 116, but somewhere in the process, a couple months down the road, they decide they come forward to change some things and kind of make those changes, and we don't get to see it again. Is that a possibility?
Commissioner, I would just comment that they're already coordinating with us on going after their state funding application, and that it's for 96 units. So they're already telling the state that that's what they're going for. So once they get their state funding, they'll be locked in to those 96 units with their funding. And I think there was some of that information in the comment letters you might have seen about vouchers. That stuff is already kind of getting hashed out. So it would be very much not intelligent of CRP Affordable if they started monkeying with the units now that they're starting to apply for state funding. So it's pretty well locked in.
No, thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about the concept of the parking lot shading? Are you talking shade structures over the parking? Are you talking trees? What are you talking about that?
Yeah, so most cities have a requirement to limit the heat island index, which is when you have a lot of blacktop, it elevates the heat. Most cities are about 1 to 3 degrees hotter than rural environments. So when you introduce blacktop, you want to make sure that you're providing canopies for shading, stuff like that. It can create a spatial impact because to put more trees, typically you need a 5-foot wide area for the root ball. And that can impact the number of parking spaces that are provided. So there's a balance that we have with shading of the parking areas versus the number of spaces. Because when you put a diamond in for a tree, we want that extended out. And so it usually takes about at least half of a third of a space. So I think to make sure that they hit the right numbers in their parking, that's what they were asking for relief for.
So one of the reasons I was asking about that had to do with, and you'd mentioned it briefly, the technical term, but the solar panels. Okay, and most apartment complexes we've seen over at Walmart, they put in shade structures basically to capture more of the sun, if you will, not just on the rooftops and things like that. The apartment complex across the street has those as well too. So is there anything, and this might be an applicant, maybe in their presentation they can kind of share, is that, are there plans to actually put solar panels on the rooftop there, since they are going all electric, and no natural gas on this site? It would seem beneficial to put in, parking lot shade structures, those type of things.
Yeah, the California Energy Commission a couple of years ago mandated that all single-family residential have solar. That's why you've seen a lot of the new developments have solar. Multifamily, as of a year ago, I think is now required. They also have to put in battery storage systems. The typical areas of the roof to do that. But carports are also a good amenity. We've suggested that to many an applicant. If they don't have enough space on the roof, or their mechanical appurtenances take up space, or they don't have the weight-bearing capacity or a well to get up there, the carports are a great alternative. They're actually easier to clean for the maintenance and all that. But yeah, we offer that option, is that it does provide a good balance to what the state is requiring, which is this site will have to have a photovoltaic system.
Yeah, I just wonder, excuse me, how much of that they would need. It just seems like they're limiting themselves with no natural gas at that development. So they're going all electric. And we've all seen what's happened to our electric rates here in this state, with the rates going sky high. So when you're dealing with affordable housing, you're dealing with people with a certain income level that you stated, and you've got out of cost control with electric rates. It would seem that more solar panels would be appropriate for the project. And you may not have the answer as to how much that they plan on putting. Maybe they can in their presentation, but it would be interesting to know.
Yeah, no, Commissioner Vrooman, just a point. In talking with all multifamily providers, market rate and affordable, they do a lot of business in different jurisdictions up and down the state of California. Some of them are already migrating to full electric because some jurisdictions have changed their development code to pure electric, but you are seeing a shift. Although there's a savings on not having to put in the gas line, they tell me that the downstream impact is higher cost appliances. I think the unique thing about this site is they don't have washer and dryers in each of the units. They'll have a laundry facility as part of the community room. So that might be another way that the applicant can communicate about the photovoltaic needs versus the overall need for the development.
It would seem that having your own laundry facility in your own apartment would be the better option for quality. We talked about parking. I'm not so convinced either that 137 spots, I can tell you in my law enforcement career, is having, complaints regarding parking and things like that and overflow. So I also wanted to ask that question regarding Hawthorne. So that's going to eventually punch through to Jefferson, right about where Murrieta Hot Springs is, where that county facility is. I mean, that's on the traffic circulation plan. My opinion, I don't think that that's a great idea, and that would be something that council would have to change. But with this project, with Hawthorne and the width there, is there going to be improvements just on the north side of Hawthorne or on the south side as well? Is there going to be curb and gutters on both sides of Hawthorne as it extends east from Adams Avenue?
Yeah, I don't believe there's going to be any parking allowed. I think that's bike lane, but I believe, and we have Rick Alzaga from engineering on that. But I believe if we just have the lanes, curb, gutter, sidewalk, and that's it. But there's no parking allowed on those types of streets. Yeah,
So
I think it's a future collector road. I think that's what it is.
So that's my next question. So on Adams Avenue, and directly in front of that project there's a fire hydrant there. And so is Adams Avenue going to be widened at any point, especially as you're traveling northbound if you were to turn right or turn east on Hawthorne right there? Is there what would be a deceleration lane, or at least the portion of Hawthorne widened north and south of Hawthorne?
And you're talking about just the Hawthorne that's part of the project site?
Correct.
And I see Rick Alzaga joining us. This is Rick. He's our civil engineer with our engineering department.
Hello, Commissioner Vrooman. So to respond to the Adams Avenue widening, there's no focus on widening Adams Avenue. projects are required to improve their frontage, and this is not their frontage. What they are required to do is make a connection. So right now, Adams Avenue on the west side, there are existing curb returns. And ultimately, Hawthorne will tie into with that width and that intersection at its ultimate improvements. For now, it'll be, I believe it was standard 109, that'll come in off the frontage. Once they leave the frontage, it'll taper down to standard 109. And the connection will be the 2 lanes egress, 1 lane ingress to the property. And the details are to be seen, but basically it'll be aligned in such a way that it will accommodate the future widening on both Hawthorne to Ultimate and Adams, but it will make the physical connection as far as asphalt is concerned. And with regards to the hydrant, those are details that it may need to be relocated. We don't know the detail to that, but if that's the case, then it will be required to be relocated.
Well, based on what you're telling me, it wouldn't on this particular project because you're not widening out Adams. And so there's a logical place where I'm going with this, is that if there's not enough places to park in the apartment complex, that's the reality of it. So where are they going to park? You can't park on Hawthorne right there, east of Adams. That portion of Adams is not going to be widened. So the next logical place, if you couldn't find a parking spot, is going to be on the west side of Adams on Hawthorne on the, I believe it's a private street, not a city-maintained road, correct?
I think it is private.
Yeah, it's a private road. And so the homeowners there, let me ask the next logical question, is could they then, because it's a private road owned and maintained by them, they put up signs saying no street parking, we could tow the cars away if they're parked there. Is that a reality?
Not a reality we should get to. I think these are things that the property manager would need to invigorate in their responses tonight to you, to ensure that we don't make neighbors get signs and call tow trucks. That's not what this project is proposed for. This project, again, to conform with the development code, you have to park on site. There's no allowance to park off-site, not for commercial projects, not for residential. Everyone has to accommodate, and that's a big bone with normal market rate projects. Parking, we're told we're the toughest city in Southern California by all developers with our parking code. And I'm happy to say I don't want to change it because I think it works. But here, we got state law telling us what the threshold is, and we have a property manager who's going to be responsible for making sure that we don't get to that point, Commissioner. But I think in your experience, you've probably seen a lot of different things. So.
Yeah, I've seen things just kind of spin out of control when they're not handled properly by the management. So that was another question of mine. Is the management company that you speak of, are they going to be on site? Are they going to have a physical office at the apartment complex?
Yeah, I believe that they have to be on site 24/7, but we'll have the applicant underscore that role of theirs.
Another question that was in the documents had to do with some of the pedestrian-friendly and prevention of cut-through. What mitigation is there going to be right now? Could they walk out of off the property and then just kind of cut through the open field over onto Jefferson? Is there anything that's going to mitigate or prevent that?
The project itself has a 6-foot solid concrete wall around it from the north, east, and west side. There will be a public sidewalk provided along Hawthorne that will allow people to walk down to Adams. We're not encouraging or thinking that people would trespass on other properties, but are you saying that they'll go back to Murrieta Hot Springs Road?
Correct. I mean, if they walk out onto Hawthorne and then instead of turning right, going downhill down towards Adams, they could just cut across the field, walk over to Murrieta Hot Springs, and it becomes a cut through exactly what in the provisions here in the saying, hey, this project is going to prevent that. I could just, as a reality, would probably assume that there's going to be people cutting through that open field just if shopping or other things are that direction as opposed to walking all the way around?
I think there's safe, viable points to get to a bus stop or retail. To me, that would be walking up Adams and around. Maybe that's something the applicant can place into their agreement to make sure that they're training their tenants to observe the law, not trespass.
Or some type of fencing that would prevent that, or something along those lines, working with that adjacent property owner. Again, my experience, these things happen, it then becomes a law enforcement call, and it becomes an impact to the police department.
Dennis, Carl just reminded me that facility is under the County of Riverside. I actually know the gentleman that operates that facility. That could be an easy phone call from me to them, just asking them about their procedures and what their concerns might be. I can follow up on that separate from this hearing.
Okay, sounds good. They have a perimeter fence, but where the cut through would actually be south of their perimeter fence. Just, walking straight to the intersection there. It's not obstructed. I went out there and took a look. And then,
I'll double check if there's an easement there today. That's another thing that.
okay. And then back where that fire hydrant was, years ago, the city did what they call a safe routes to school, and they installed sidewalk all the way so people could walk to the elementary school. But right where that fire hydrant is, there's a gap in that. It basically stops at Hawthorne, and then wouldn't go on the east side of Adams Avenue to accommodate the sidewalk at the new part of Hawthorne that this project would improve. So it goes back to that is there a reason to widen that? Because there is no safe route to school right at that little piece there. There's probably about 100-yard gap.
Where is that again, Commissioner? Because there are grants for safe routes to school still in California. That's something we talk about, especially for Adams Avenue site. We want to make sure that kids have a shaded and, sidewalk-friendly type of environment. But if you can remind me what that is, I'd like to learn more about
It's
that.
on the east side of Adams Avenue. It stops, ironically, right at the northwest corner of Hawthorne. So it doesn't go in front of those houses that are directly in front on the Adams side, in front of this project. So it stops right there. So it wouldn't connect with the sidewalk of the kids coming down that sidewalk there. There'd be a gap, about 100 yards.
Probably what happened was those homes went up prior to us having a formal requirement for frontage improvements. So when they're redeveloped, they'll be required to widen and put in that stuff. But in the interim, if we have school children walking to and from the site, that's more immediate. So yeah, definitely I can look into that as a follow-up. Yeah.
And maybe coincided with this project if it were to be approved.
Definitely, because one of the great things about a project like this is that it will be a place for children to reside with their families, and they're going to take advantage of our top quality school districts. So that's an important note.
Another question, I'm sorry to keep throwing these out here, but I think they're important. Many apartment complexes, when you get to a certain height or a certain amount of stories, require elevators, typically at the third story level many times. Is there anything in our code that requires that, much like hotels, those type of things like that? And it's something that's not in this project? I just wanted to confirm.
They're careful to, I think, orient folks with mobility issues to the first floor. I think they get the first dibs on those. I think that's how that program is allowed. We do have elevator systems proposed with 3, 4, 5-story facilities. Typically the 3-story for cost containment, we don't see it as common, but for 4th floor and higher, I think our Adams Avenue project, which includes 4th floors, has elevators and refuge areas. So it is something that's also, I think, with fire code and building code where there's a threshold where that kicks in. But I don't commonly see elevators with 3-story projects.
So there's nothing in our code that requires what triggers it, whether it's the 3rd or the 4th floor. It's up to the applicant to make that determination.
I think it's embedded in building and fire code. Yeah, because I know that for a pressurized stairwell, that's 5 floors and higher. So there's certain things that are kicked in on the level of floor it's at.
Another, I don't know if you can maybe flip back to the profile picture where it shows the kind of the elevation with the block wall.
Let me scroll, I apologize. I'm not trying to make people dizzy here.
There you go.
Yeah,
Right there.
elevation.
So what's the height of that block wall?
Well, well, there's no block wall shown on this map. The height of the structures is 40 feet. The maximum height is 50 feet for the code requirement. But what you don't see is that 6-foot solid wall or the landscaping that will be part of this.
Okay, so that's gonna be at the top of the elevation, but that little cross stitch down below right here, is that gonna be a wall or some type of basically kind of separate that property with the house down below it?
Yeah, so this is the grade, but add to this a 6-foot solid wall along that entire property line. The only gaps will be at the frontage for the entrances on Hawthorne, but the entire perimeter will have a minimum 6-foot tall solid wall.
Correct. I guess what I'm looking at, like last month, we had a workshop that had to do with softening of the landscapes and block walls. It just would look very monolithic if this was some type of a retaining wall, if you will. Then you add another 6-foot block wall on top of it. I'm just going by based upon the design here. So I'm just, if maybe you can comment on that.
So just to interject, the cross-section you see, that's basically the soil. So the architect just wanted to hash it as such, but that's the soil, and what Jared is saying is on top of that, that top line is where the 6-foot wall would begin. But that's soil, that's supposed to indicate soil.
So would that be what the residents, if someone were walking on Adams Avenue, are they gonna see a big hillside of the soil? What are they gonna see?
No, what they're gonna see if they're walking on Adams, they're gonna see what they see right today, for the most part, because there's a property between this project and Hawthorne. No, and Adams, I'm sorry. And so you'd have to enter Hawthorne in some ways, and it's all gonna be at grade for the most part. So this rendering is a little misleading, if you will, because that hatch is simply just supposed to be a cross-section. They want to do a level bottom, but that's the soil. So whoever's walking, they're gonna be at grade, and they're only gonna see the structures and the screen wall, basically. Not even a retaining wall, it's a screen wall that would go around the perimeter of the property just to separate this project from the neighbors.
Yeah, I think this image here is pretty misleading. I see what you're saying, but I think the explanation is that is just dirt. They're just trying to show the different elevation of how the buildings will kind of conform with like the natural, undulation of the hill here. So I don't think it's going to be a block wall at all. I think it'll be just natural house, and then what it's not showing is a 6-foot wall with the landscape. But
Well, that's good. I just, in light of our last workshop with the hillside ordinance, and we never got to to some of the softening of the landscapes, and when it comes to
right.
those, I just wanted to make sure that wasn't something that, perception-wise was gonna be, a wall on top of a wall, because we were shown some pictures of where that has happened in other developments throughout the city.
No, I totally understand your concern, because if that's a 40-foot building, that looks like a 40-foot retaining wall in this rendering here. So I'm glad that's not the case.
Right.
No, my apologies, Commissioner, that now that you said it, it does look like something else. That's not a good rendering, I apologize.
Not a problem. The clubhouse or the community building, what's the size of that? Do you know the dimensions?
Forgive me, I think it was a little above 3,000 square feet, sorry. I don't have that information in front of me, but I think it's a little bit above 3,000.
Yeah, maybe the applicant would be able to kind of share that. And then pretty much lastly, the security concerns. I noticed on this project, there's not security gates. Most apartment complexes, condominium complexes throughout the city, especially the newer ones that have been established, and many of them have gone through the retrofitting process where they've added them. And I do think that that's a valuable amenity to put in on this project. It's just my personal feeling, and I'm just wondering if the applicant would entertain putting in security gates there. It gives another element of less crime.
I don't disagree. It's not part of the current project, but it'd be good to ask the applicant that specific question.
And the only other thing in the developer letter that, or the letter from their attorney that they had specified here, and I thought was kind of interesting, is, and this is a final comment here, they're not required to show, or we can't make them show or prove that any of the incentives would be, result in cost reduction, meaning that they can say, hey, look, we don't want to do this or ask for this, or we want to do it this way because it's less expensive, and then they can, it's a shared savings across the entire development. But we can't ask them to prove it. We just got to take their word for it. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Well, what local jurisdictions would be responsible for is writing a response if we disagree with that. And we would have to have our own economic tabulation to justify that. That's a pinnacle of the state law. A jurisdiction would want to be very careful in disagreeing with that. But yeah, the point is well taken. These are much smaller requests than I've seen with other affordable housing projects. We've seen people get waivers for undergrounding of power and other things that are huge, like $1 million things. These are fairly small requests in my opinion, but the state law is clear. The onus is upon the local jurisdiction to disprove the applicant's request, and that's a high standard to meet.
Yeah. I think the state of California and our elected officials at that level, many of them have set our cities up for failure, or they're trying to forcibly put their own standards, their Sacramento standards on pretty much everybody, to where we don't have local control is being taken away very quickly, in not just this arena, in the law enforcement arena, and pretty much everything else, and it's quite sad to see. And with that,
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for the thorough questions, Commissioner Vrooman. Commissioner Harlan, any questions for staff right now?
Sure, just a couple. Probably speak for my fellow commissioners here when I say this. A lot of moving parts with this. When you look at the information that's been provided to us, a lot of time, effort, and passion's gone into this. So thank you in advance to the staff, the applicant, and the public for what you guys have brought forth to us all so that we can make the best decision possible. So thank you. To concur with my other commissioners regarding these style comments, and when you drive through this area, it really has a special feel to it. It's really neat, the neighborhood and the community, and you could see that passion come through from the letters that were written and from the folks here in the room. So I would just ask the applicant, as we, if this goes forward, or as we look at this, do our best to make this blend in, if that's where this goes, and really kind of have it match kind of what's there. So a couple things. This is rental only, not homeownership, correct?
Correct.
The zoning, having been in place since 1999, multifamily to clarity. Thank you for that, Jared. As well as affordable and low income, I think means different things to different people. So the slide that you shared with the target for what this was targeting, I think is valuable, so thank you for that. Regarding traffic, I know it's been talked about here before, but you've got 96 units that are going to be coming down Hawthorne Boulevard, right? That is going to be widened and everything, that's great. But it's going to hit Adams and go to what, Guava and Ivy? So in the notes here, this project will create new traffic with residential use and has been analyzed and reviewed by their traffic division, engineering department, fire department. I noticed there was no VMT analysis. I believe that was in part because of the housing numbers difference between the plan. Some of the public comments talked about commuter drive-through. Was that plan for thought incorporated into making sure that we've got infrastructure to account and accommodate for the increased traffic? Because I mean, at the end of the day, nobody knows it better than the folks that live there.
Commissioner Harlan, the project does rely upon a vehicle miles traveled memo, but I would like to see if I can ask Brian Stevenson to join us. He's our traffic engineer. I think he would be able to be responsive to that question from you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. So the project prepared what we refer to as a traffic study scoping agreement. We require that of all development applications that come into the city to determine if a traffic study is required and what level of traffic study is required. So we have two different types of traffic analysis in the city, level of service and VMT. The project screened out of the level of service analysis because it generated less peak hour trips than our minimum threshold for a full traffic study. For the VMT analysis, it screened out of a full VMT analysis. They had to do a letter describing the number of trips anticipated to be generated, the zoning that is in the general plan, their proposed zoning, and because of the number of units that they're proposing, along with the number of units that are currently out there today, it's less than what is in the approved general plan. So it's screened out of a full VMT analysis.
So, and to add a little more clarity to that, so from a general plan standpoint, if you just step back, the general plan anticipates a certain amount of traffic in that area, and Brian and I worked on that in the general plan update, right? So I know it's hard for a layperson to understand, but there's an amount of traffic that's already built into the general plan there. And essentially what we're saying is this project's not proposing more than that. So it's not creating some kind of a traffic impact. That's not to say that if you're a resident and you live there, there's nothing going on there now and you're gonna get 96 units, there's not gonna be traffic. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we're looking at it from a planning standpoint. And from a planning standpoint, we anticipated that there would be traffic there. And this project is not proposing more than we anticipated in the general plan. So it doesn't create an impact from the general plan standpoint.
Got it, thank you. You know, as I was looking at the VMT, right, it talks about the number of homes versus a plan, and that came up short. And again, as I looked at it, you know, when the public writes in talking about the commuter drive-throughs, you know, again, the question is, was that being accounted for? And it sounds like it has. Just another thing on parking, thank you for that. Are these going to be assigned spaces, right? So each unit has 1, 2 parking spots, or do we know?
I believe that's how the property manager assigns spaces, is that when they look at a unit, the type of unit, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, provides a certain amount of spaces, but I think they categorize that and track it per person that gets those specific spaces.
Okay, maybe we take it up with the applicant later, but yeah, I think overflow parking, some type of a plan, because you're going to have birthdays and weddings and different things. And again, from what I read from the community, there's already, you know, they're stretched as it is now, so I think that's important. 2 last things. The applicant provided some data regarding home values and crime. Some different data points and metrics, assuming the staff was able to see those. Does the staff have something similar, or maybe, you know, their own particular set of data, and or care to comment on what was provided by the applicant?
Mr. Harlan, when it comes to economic devaluation, the only time we'd ever look at that type of discussion is with an environmental impact report. That's when you look at arguments about urban decay, you know, issues that could actually have a frank, distinct impact upon a jurisdiction. The type of CEQA document that we're analyzing doesn't require that type of economic analysis, so we wouldn't prepare that to justify. I think when you see different types of studies and papers go back and forth, I think staff goes back to what we know, which is our development code, our general plan, and the California Environmental Quality Act. I think that's where we put a lot of our thought. But I can tell you, working on 1,000 cell towers in my early career, everyone had a radiation study that was better than the other person's. And I found that, let's go back to the FCC and the Federal Drug Administration and see what their numbers are. And we were told, you don't have the authority to look at that. So I would just underscore that I don't believe we have the threshold of a CEQA document to analyze economic impacts. And so we don't have any comment on that for this project.
Okay. And then just one last one. I know there was a comment regarding area schools, student to teacher ratios being stretched. Is that something outside of this realm? Is there any type of a follow-up as we add new housing here to?
Yeah, so when an applicant submits, if an applicant is approved and satisfies their conditions of approval, prior to issuance of building permit, they have to provide their school fees. Those school fees are given to the school district, and the state of California is required to expand their school districts per the population increases. But it's more of a fee-based transaction between an applicant and the school district, not building facilities for them.
I would also add, we coordinate with the school districts on the general plan. They were part of the general plan update. They're aware of the development that's planned in the city. This is development that's anticipated in this area. So this is not a surprise to the school district that there'd be more students coming from this area in the future as things get built.
Appreciate it. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Harlan. Vice Chair Fisher, questions for staff?
No questions.
No questions. I've just got a few here, Jarrett, and possibly one for engineering. What is the maximum occupancy for each unit in this development? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. Is there a maximum occupancy that's allowed?
I think the only metric I have is that we have about 3.2 persons per household, but I apologize, I don't have a quick metric on occupancy.
That's okay.
I think
I'll
it's set by
save it for the
fire and
applicant.
building code.
It's not something that's in the development code. It's not something we enforce from a planning standpoint, but it could be a building concern. But yeah, you could ask the applicant.
So we don't have a code for like a limit of amount of occupants in an apartment unit?
Not in the development code. That's not something we enforce through the planning process.
Okay.
The same thing with hotel rooms. We don't enforce that.
No.
And
Okay.
I think that's a definition by the state for family.
Right.
Family is not limited to a certain amount of people. I think a family could be 2 kids, 7 kids. I think there's some old state law that I recall that we have to be careful on interpreting what a family is. I think that's part of it. But I think that's a good question for the applicant on, do they have a portfolio of the number of people that would be in a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom unit? I think that would be, like, do they have any procedures on who
Sure.
they allocate space for?
Okay. We'll bring that back for the applicant. As far as watershed, I didn't see like a retention basin or anything on the site. I imagine they're probably going to utilize their landscape and, permeable pavers. Mr. Elzaga, this might be a better question for you, but I'd like to guarantee that, if this project does move forward, that the surrounding residents aren't going to deal with watershed and stormwater discharge from this project.
So good evening, Chair LaPaglia. So this project, like every project that we develop, we always take a close look at the watershed. Is there water coming to the property? Is there water leaving the property, and how do they do that? So they're going to be required, like every project that we do nowadays, they're going to have to manage the water, route their water, treat their water, and then discharge their water. Typically, per California drainage law, it moves toward the same direction that it in the existing condition. And so in this case, if there's going to be screen wall all the way around the property, sounds like it's going to go toward the front. And the project will also have to treat their water, so it'll be some form of detention system, and it'll be discharged in a flow that's less than and slower than the existing condition. So we always look at those details and make sure that it doesn't impact neighboring properties in a negative way.
So with what you just said, as far as the water being retained and treated before it discharges, is there, in typical developments in the last few years, we see different scales of retention basins, given the size of the project. Is there anything, to your knowledge, that serves as a retention basin to trap the water that's on site, to retain the water from?
So to retain, by definition, is to capture it and not release it. It stays on the property. And detention back in the days, there was detention systems, and they would just hold it and discharge it. So the
My-
only way
My
properties-
interpretation was that like it would percolate back into the soil.
Correct. So the primary objective of projects, as far as water quality is concerned, is keep it on your property and put it in the ground. The 9 out of 10 times, that's really not feasible 100%. So geotechnical engineers, they do their testing and they determine how much can the water actually take back in. And so there's some physical constraints, and then based on those studies, we require projects to put that water in the ground, and what they physically cannot put in the ground because let's just say there's clay or whatever the soil characteristics that doesn't accept that water, then they have to manage it and release it in a way that's, again, non-erosive, non-impacting to the neighboring properties.
Okay. Does the specifications for the asphalt around the property, does it call out for some type of, forgive me, I'm drawing a blank on the type of asphalt that's used to absorb,
Sure.
rainwater and whatnot?
So there's many pieces to this puzzle when it comes to water quality. And projects are required to look at what we would call low-impact development. So some projects, they will do, like in the parking stalls, porous pavers. So you have decorative pavers, and in the roadways, you have asphalt. And the porous pavers, so they're engineered cross-sections that they're designed in a way where they receive more water. And so it's promoting, again, low-impact development, because if it was all concrete, rooftops and concrete, well, of course, you have more surface water. So there's a menu of items to be considered, and we look at those to see what's most functional and practical and applicable to every project. And what those are is between the designers and the city, we look at them and we go back and forth to find that design that works for the project, but also meets the NPDES permit that we have to respond to, which is a state permit that we have to make sure it complies with.
Okay. Is that something that this, these state mandates for this housing development can tie our hands with not requiring these types of things for watershed? I would assume not, because
So, correct.
it's negative.
For water quality, they're just on their own. We have to meet water quality requirements.
Great. Good to know. Thank you for that. And as far as code enforcement, a lot of talk, so far about traffic or more so parking, and that falling back to code enforcement. It's my understanding from experience that code enforcement relies on public complaint. It's not like something that they go around citing people for parking illegally or something like that. It has to be reported by somebody, like, hey, there's a red Honda Civic parked where it's not supposed to be parked or whatnot. Is that true? And if that's the case, we're putting a lot of weight on the shoulders and a lot of, just time consumed by the surrounding residents to have to call code enforcement and report these violations. Is that how it works with code enforcement, or am I misunderstanding?
It does. We're basically, we're mainly based upon the public complaint. We do have a very active community. We do receive very good information from them about concerns, but yeah, it's based upon the public calling in concerns to our department.
Okay. So I every time someone's parked illegally, let's just say for hypothetical reasons on Hawthorne across Adams, next to the single family residence, they're going to have to call code enforcement. Code enforcement comes out, cites them, and it's a whole process that's in the hands of the neighbors.
And a chair, I would say that years ago, I got a call from code enforcement about a concern about people parking on Washington past 10 p.m. in our bike lane. We immediately met with the property manager, asked them, why do you have residents parking in the middle of Washington Avenue at night? And we found that they had an issue where a number of residents filled up their garages with storage and took over most of the spaces. So that was remedied immediately because we underscored the fact that if we have one person that rear ends a vehicle on the side of the road, the city's probably gonna have to pick up that bill. And that was a way that, as a city planner, I have no problem contacting property managers or anybody running a facility, whether it's commercial or residential, and asking them nicely to correct it before we have to get involved. But I would say it just takes that one call from me to make that call to the property manager, because I look at things about a cyclist can't use the bike lane if a car is parked there. So that's at a minimum standard. I have to protect the rights of way. That's part of my job, is to make sure that we don't have those things going on.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. That's all I have for now. I'll reserve the rest of my questions after we hear from the public and the applicant. And with that being said, I think we can move on to opening the public hearing.
The applicant would speak before the public at this point.
We'll have the applicant up before public hearing?
You would have the applicant up, you'd have questions of the applicant, then you would take public testimony, and then the applicant would have a rebuttal, and then you would deliberate.
Okay, my cheat sheet is off today, my bad. Well, so with that, can we invite the applicant up for questions and a presentation? And when you come up to the podium, please state your name and we'll go from there. Yeah.
Yep. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. My name is Garrett Bascom. I'm the project manager for this project, CRP Affordable Housing and Community Development. I have here with me tonight Liz Kirk, our Director of Operations, and Russell Morris, acting as our counsel from Myers Nave, a leading expert in California housing law. I'm going to give like a little overview of why we want to do business in Murrieta, and then we can talk about all the questions you had. I think will work well. So I'd like to speak for a few minutes on why we'd like to bring affordable homes to Murrieta. I'd also like to request that we be allowed the applicant rebuttal time after the public comment per the Planning Commission rules and procedures.
Sure.
First of all, Murrieta is a fantastic place to live and raise a family. I grew up in the Inland Empire. I've lived here my entire life. I've had friends and family that have lived in Murrieta over the years, so I've definitely spent some time here. It has great schools, as has been mentioned. It's beautiful public parks. My family actually takes our family photos here every year for the last 8 years or so at different parks. Murrieta has amazing restaurants, lots of great shopping centers, close proximity to outdoor activities like camping and dirt biking, bike trails, and things like that. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. The issue is it can be expensive to live here. According to Zillow, the average price home in the area is $630,000, and the average rent for a two-bedroom apartment is $2,500. This is much higher than the rents that we will provide at our facility. The rents, the way they work, they're set on a range based on annual median income of the family. So for a two-bedroom apartment, based on that level, it can be anywhere from $550 a month to $1,550 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. So that's $1,000 to $2,000 difference from a market rate apartment in the area down the street from the same complex. So that's a huge savings for any family. That kind of difference is what can allow working class families to afford to live in this area. Next, I'd like to talk about this site specifically. In affordable housing, the sites we select are very important, and we're especially excited about this site because of its proximity to local amenities. The site is situated within walking distance, not cutting through, but within about a mile to here, the Town Square Park, the amphitheater, the public library, the Murrieta Elementary School. It's close to lots of restaurants, including my favorite, Calhoun's Barbecue. If you haven't had that, you should try it. Our site is also located within walking distance to the Murrieta Spectrum Shopping Center and Murrieta's Plaza, Springs Plaza. Included in those is all kinds of shopping, all kinds of potential jobs for our potential residents. Stores like the Savers Thrift Store, Home Depot, Big Lots, the 99-cent store, a couple of different auto mechanics, grocery stores, and to Walmart. Another especially important reason the site is great for affordable housing It's within walking distance to public transportation. There's several bus stops along Madison Avenue and Juniper Street, just right out there, both within walking distance. Another significant advantage to bringing affordable housing in Murrieta is the economic benefit. This project will cost approximately $50 million in construction costs alone. So this will create hundreds of construction jobs over the next few years if we were to move forward. And those workers will work here, they'll eat here, they'll spend money in this area. The project will also create a few permanent jobs. As mentioned a couple of times about on-site staff, there will be 3 permanent staff members working at the facility. These include 2 leasing and resident service staff members and 1 maintenance staff member. So one of the leasing staff members is a live on site, so they're there 24/7. They typically work business hours, but they're there in case of emergency. And that also gives them greater insight into potential problems and a greater ability to identify resident issues and non-compliance, like, for example, parking. Another obvious benefit will be we're providing 96 homes to the area. These homes will be for young families who are just starting out in their careers, or for families who are struggling and need help getting back on their feet. These homes are for residents who will work local, shop local, eat and play local. So in conclusion, as you guys, as you deliberate on this decision, I hope you'll consider the economic benefit that we'll bring to the community, consider the homes we're providing to families who need them the most, consider the opportunity we're providing for the less fortunate to still be able to live in such a wonderful community. And also for the ability for families to raise their children in such a great city. So I took a few notes on some questions, so I'll go through a couple of things, and then obviously I'm gonna miss some, and then you'll tell me what I missed. Sure. So one of them is the solar panels. 100%, we absolutely max out as much solar as we can do, because it's complicated, but we do a thing called a QAC, which is a utility allowance thing. And so as much solar as we can get in there, we like to do, because we get a big return on that. It helps pay for the project. We are proposing carports around the exterior of the site. All of those would incorporate solar as well. Some of the services provided, I forget who was talking about that, but entering into like a contract of that. Believe it or not, this is actually the easier part about these projects. Funding is much, much more difficult. And we enter into MOUs or contracts with some of the funding organizations that get very specific in the programs we have to provide. And so it didn't come up on the slide, but I believe on this one we're required, or we have entered into an agreement to offer approximately 200 hours a year indefinitely of different programs. Now the programs do change and evolve because, you know, the residents change. And so yeah, if an ESL class makes sense, then we'll offer that. But if it doesn't, we offer something else. But we enter into agreements with the funding sources. In this one, we won project-based vouchers from the county and also county funds. And so that's part of the people we enter into agreements with, and also with, you know, the state levels, SIDLAC and TCAC. They're very, very strict on that kind of stuff. All right, what else? So the occupancy per the units, that's a pretty strict requirement actually. It's 2 people per bedroom plus 1 per unit. So the maximum for a 1-bedroom would be 3, for a 2-bedroom would be 5, for a 3-bedroom would be 7. And so that would be monitored by the on-site property manager. And so they do, in addition to just verifying that, they actually do twice a year annual checks on the inside of every unit for maintenance purposes to make sure the units don't have any, you know, it's for our benefit as well, but it's also to make sure the residents are complying, right? And to make sure any maintenance doesn't get out of hand so that we can keep the property functioning well and just looking good.
Who did you say sets the occupancy? level?
I'm not sure if that's funding or if it's the property manager we contract with.
Okay.
I know it's in their contract that the residents enter into agreement with when they lease the property or the unit, but that is the limit.
Okay.
The retention, we are planning a retention, underground storage retention. It's at the kind of like the south right corner of the project.
Okay.
It's under parking. We can't do a carport there just because of the foundation issues, but that has been looked at. I'm not the expert on that, but I know that we've done that and looked into that. Security gates, duly noted. We had them planned at one point, and we kind of went back and forth, and we ended up taking them out because we got more parking, because we wanted more parking. So I'm definitely open to the idea of bringing them back. We just need to find some more parking. So talk about parking for a minute.
I would just say that if I could, there's different styles of parking gates. They don't have to swing or whatever. So just something to consider.
Part of it is we had to be a certain distance back from the entrance off Hawthorne for fire, I can't remember, stacking or something like that. And so then we had to push them back to where a stall was. And so we lost 4 stalls where the gates come just be sliding. And so it was like, it's only 4 stalls, but 4 stalls is 4 stalls. So we'd like to include gates on all of our properties, but it's, there's always a give and take. There is, okay, I guess I'll move on. Real quick on parking. I know you don't like reports and things, but the Office of Planning and Research by the Governor's Office, they did a study on affordable housing, and according to their study, what they found is, 100% affordable projects, they tend to just have less parking than market rate. And the reason why is because, they just literally make less money. So a car is a significant purchase. And so, yes, they still have cars, but they just have less than what you would normally find at a market rate community. And they found that affordable projects, residents tend to try and find locations that are closer to their work and closer to public transportation, because they do have a knowledge of that. And so we kind of went over it, or you kind of went over it, but so right now we have 137 spaces. Typically how this works is each resident would be assigned a single stall. If a certain unit doesn't need one, they can reallocate that to the pool. And then after that, then they're kind of on a as needed basis given out and assigned. But really what would happen is the property manager develops a parking management plan, and kind of like the resident services, it evolves with the amount of parking, and it's kind of an ongoing effort to manage the parking at the facility.
At some point, would the residents of the facility just not be allowed to have a certain vehicle? Like, I think, you go to some schools like colleges, like I can think of Point Loma being one, and as a freshman and a sophomore, you're just not allowed to have a car. A little different,
I don't know is the honest answer, but I do know that the property managers are very up to date on housing laws and Fair Housing Act, I believe it is, where you can't discriminate on certain things, and that might be one of them, where you can't discriminate giving them priority because or not priority because they have multiple cars. Mm-hmm. That would be my guess, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
So that's all the notes I had from the things you guys you mentioned, but if you questions or how we do this.
Yeah, we can bring it to the commission for questions. I think maybe one burning one that we all would like to know. Are you guys open to redesigning the architecture of the facility if it were to move forward? It would really be nice.
Not on a holistic level, but we're definitely open to, adding elements that would be, appealing. The problem is, we've won funding on 2 sources. that starts the clock ticking. So we have to have shovels in the ground by a certain time. So starting over on a design is at this point in time is not something we can really do.
Okay. Well, do any of the commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Wojcik, I can start with you.
Just a couple. Just a few. You were talking about, based on income, there's potential that some people would pay $550 a month rent per unit. And then is that supplemented through the government for additional rent over and above the $550?
Yeah, so it depends on this funding source. We won, I think it was 24 county-based vouchers from the county of Riverside. And basically what they do is they step in and pay the gap, right? Because if we charge $550 a month, the property could never actually manage itself, right? And so, yeah, the gap is covered by different sources. We have to get multiple sources to make these projects actually work.
So you would basically have like a baseline rate, and then that potential tenant would qualify to pay X dollars, and then the county or some other government agency would kick in the difference.
Exactly.
Okay. You know, I really hope you reconsider your answer to Commissioner LaPaglia about doing something on the exterior. You're coming in here wanting to be a partner of the community, and I see Ironwood Prison. I would think that you can do some kind of decorative foam on the roof lines, maybe around the edges of the windows to soften it up a little bit. But
I agree with
I mean,
that.
I don't think anybody could, logically can look at that and say, yeah, that looks appealing to live in.
In Murrieta, right.
In Murrieta, maybe somewhere else, but so I would hope you would consider that if you want to be a partner.
Maybe I phrased it wrong. Absolutely, I'm open to that. I thought you meant completely redesigning it to be a different architectural style, right? Where we're kind of starting over.
Well, I mean, you know,
That'd be best.
Different roof lines, and something a little bit more, rustic country, something like that. This is extremely modern. I'm sure you've been by the site 100 times, and it's good old rural Murrieta over there. And,
yeah.
the colors. Hate to be rude about it, but everything. I don't know how much time you guys have, but it'd be great if this project moves forward to have a different look. But sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I don't even like the bike in the picture. The parking issue, is there a contingent plan? 96 units, 137 spots. Every unit's going to have a reserved spot. There's going to be some units that are going to have 2 cars, plus you're going to have guest parking. You have probably a certain number of handicap spots. I just don't think it's realistic. So have you guys thought about that? And if so, what did you come up with?
In a lot of our projects, we actually usually do a 1-to-1 parking ratio. This being the location it is, we added more to that in anticipation of that. And so we really do feel comfortable with this amount of parking. I mean, if you had 3 stalls for a unit, that'd be fantastic, right? But,
We're a commuter community. We don't have railway. We don't have subway. We don't have a vast taxi network. And so I just think reality out here, we're rural. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where your other projects are, but I assume they're probably in bigger cities and they have some of those amenities that we don't have. So I don't know. I just think it's going to be problematic for you guys and your tenants. You may have tenants that can't, like I said, won't be able to park where they live. And I don't know how you're going to deal with that. So I was hoping that you thought about that a little bit more and have a contingency plan, but.
Like I said, it's an ongoing development with the property manager.
There's certain procedures that I asked staff about when you guys select residents, and staff said that these actually were your procedures, that they had bullet pointed on pages, I think it's 8 and 9 in their reports. Did you see the report and see what those procedures are?
Yeah,
Selecting residents?
yeah.
Are any of those bullet points, are you in disagreement with any of those, or are those your procedures?
So these procedures are Cambridge Real Estate Services procedures. That's the property manager company that we contract with. They do thousands of units. So I don't know which bullet points you're specifically referring to, but I would trust them. They have a wealth of experience in doing this.
A couple of them are like 1 year positive verifiable rental history, security deposit equal to 1 month's rent, 5 years eviction-free rental history, talks about criminal background checks, things of that nature. So I guess my question I'm going to have is that, are you willing to enter into an agreement with the city that would run in perpetuity, as long as the project's the way it is, as presently constituted, that would say, we agree to these things? Because that's your selling point to the community tonight. And I would expect you to live by that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if the project's the same. So those residents know, and they have some solace that, hey, these guys are responsible. They're partners in our community, and they're trying to put the best tenants into their apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an agreement you're willing to do that would be essentially a recordable document that would run with the land, agreeing to those terms, which they're your terms anyway?
Well, they're not our terms. I mean, yes, they are, but
I'm not making any of this up. This came from, staff said this came from you. And this is part of the presentation, why we want to be with you guys.
It's the resident screening process that the current property manager we're looking to contract with will use to do that.
What about in the future? What if the new property manager comes and says, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to put a bunch of convicted felons in the apartment, and we're going to just run havoc in the community of Murrieta. What assurance do I have that won't happen without an agreement?
I mean, it's against our own best interest to do that. Like, we are the ones monitoring and running these properties. The last thing we want is for them to turn into the type of thing you're suggesting. So,
So it's something you would want.
Yeah, we want.
So why not do it? Let's do
properties.
it. Let's say yes.
I would have to, speak with the team on that.
So it's a possible no, you don't want to do it.
I don't know if legally we can do that.
Just an agreement between two parties that runs with the land. People do that all the time. We got residents here. I just want to give them some solace that, hey, 20 years from now, this is a A-rated community, that we do the best, we put the best in here.
Yeah, then we'd be willing to look at that, but we would have to, it'd have to be vetted thoroughly, right? Because sometimes laws change, and we have to be in compliance with state law and everything.
I agree. If there's a law that comes in that makes that part of the agreement invalid, that could obviously be modified, right? We're not here to do illegal things, legal contracts.
Right.
But as long as it stays legal, is it a problem?
Then probably not.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything else.
All right, thank you. In addition to that, say you have vacancy in your complex. Does the state step in and absorb that vacancy cost, or is that a loss to the owner?
It depends on the sources and where you are in that. A lot of times it's a loss.
So if these if the tenants, if the applicants to reside there don't meet the criteria, and you guys have to, I guess, deny their residence there, that's a loss of income for the company, and the state does not reimburse them.
Right. It can be the case.
So it's just like a thought that, at what point, the company's not making their profit, or with their occupants, and then they're still pushing away people that don't meet the criteria. That's a balance.
I mean, we
You know,
generally have many more applicants to the properties than we can actually fill.
Yeah.
And so we there's always turnover because people move for lots of reasons, but we generally operate at around a 95%
Okay.
fill
Just,
rate.
Okay.
just a thought to that, if I may?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say I live in Lake Elsinore, and I'm currently working in here at Murrieta at Walmart, Target, fast food, something along those lines. I'm making $20, maybe $30 an hour full-time. I just can't afford to live here, right? I see this property coming in. It's an opportunity to move to Murrieta, keep my wages, spend them in Murrieta versus spending them somewhere else. How do I go about being considered? Is there like a posting or
Yeah, the
apply
property
here? I mean,
manager
what
does a
does
lot
that
of
look like?
advertising. They do advertising in, like things like Craigslist and in the newspaper and online ads and all kinds of just normal methods to advertise for potential applicants. And then they help them go through the steps to apply to the different state or local county funding.
All right. Thank you. But to get back in order, Commissioner Vreeman, you have any questions for the applicant?
Just a few when it comes again to the gates. And I think you lose spots, my experience, based on the swing gates, but you also got roller gates. We've had other older apartment complexes that existed before the city incorporated, and then they retrofitted them and they put in roller gates, and it complies with our gated communities ordinance, which allows access to the police and fire departments through their remote system or remote control system or their Knox key, those type of things like that. So it would fit, I think, based upon your current design, just looking at it in my objective, mind and my experience in working in that arena years ago. I do like just a comment on your covered parking and solar panels and things like that, especially as the, state wants us to get rid of gasoline cars and go to put all of our eggs in one basket and go to electric everything. So having more electric vehicle charging stations and things like that, I think the most that would be on there. Just my question for you, that is generally, if how much would that reduce, say, a resident's electrical rate by putting all these solar panels up and generator system on site? Would it cut at a typical electric rate, 25%, 50%, 75%? What do you?
I don't know the exact numbers, but we did a study on a similar size, it was like 66 units, and the rates were in the $15 to $20 a month. I mean, it's a significant deduction from, hundreds of dollars a month for what you would imagine, because the solar, it really offsets it. I don't know exactly for this project, we're not that far yet, but it's a significant offset.
The barbecue is going to be electric too. I thought that'd be kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, or are we going to go back to propane tanks and or charcoal? Everyone's going to be issued charcoal and briquettes and things. And then one last question had to do with the community building. What's the dimensions or the size of that?
I think it's around 2,000 square feet. I don't have the plans in front of me, but that includes, I know that the club room itself has to be a minimum of like 1,200, and then there's like the 2 leasing offices, the lobby, the laundry facility, the maintenance room, 2 bathrooms. So it's probably 20 to 2,500 square feet.
And since you brought up the laundry facility, why not have them in the actual units as opposed to the old-fashioned laundromat that kind of went away by the wayside
It's a
decades
cost
ago?
issue. And providing all of those, it's a cost issue.
All right. That's all. All the questions.
That's all? Okay, thank you, Commissioner Freeman. Commissioner Harlan, any further questions? No? Vice Chair Fisher?
No questions.
No questions? And I have no further questions either, so thank you for your time on that.
Thank you for your time.
We're a little past the 2-hour mark, so let's take a quick 5-10 minute recess if anyone needs to use the restroom, and we'll resume this when we get back then. Yeah, no, do I need to hit the gavel? Right, it's, what time is it? It's 8:16. We can resume the public hearing. For everyone to please take their seats. Thank you. Okay, as we resume, we will now move on to public testimony. Madam City Clerk, do we have any public comments, starting with any proponents, opponents, or those neutral in that order?
Yes, we have Jessica Schoen
Okay, if
in
Jessica Schoen
opposition.
would like to come up. You are limited to 3 minutes, and please introduce yourself when you approach the podium. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Jessica Schulten. I am a resident of the Rosecrest community. I live on Lela Verde, just right down Adams. I've lived in this community. I was born and raised in the community about 32 years now, and chose to now also raise my family in the community. So in my very humble research, and I could be completely off base, I have researched the notice of intent dated on January 20th, 2023, states that the project qualifies as an urban which provides its certain exemptions. Per SEQA section 15191, an infilled site is defined as an urbanized area that meets one of the following criteria. 1, the site has been previously developed for qualified urban uses. 2, the site has been developed for qualified urban uses, but all immediately adjacent parcels are developed with existing qualified urban uses. Or 3, the site has not been developed for qualified urban uses. No parcels within the site has been created within the past 10 years, and the site is situated so that at least 75% of the perimeter of the site is adjacent to parcels that are developed with existing qualified urban uses at the time the lead agency receives an application for approval, and the remaining 25% of the perimeter of the site adjoins parcels that had previously been developed for qualified urban uses. In my opinion, none of these criteria are being met for this project. So SEQA section 15195, residential infilled exemptions, states that in order to qualify for this exemption, the project must be within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop, which we spoke about. The closest bus stop to this proposed project is located at Town Square, which is approximately a mile from the project. Surrounding infrastructure is not developed to handle multifamily use, especially affordable housing, where statistically the tenants will have to rely on public transit, sidewalks and bike paths, etc., which we've obviously talked ad nauseum about the parking concerns. I also have concerns about construction plans. So thinking about laydown areas, construction parking or loitering on Adams, as well as Lela Verde, SWIP plans in place, visible SWIP and OSHA violations, and concerns around that as well. Thinking about the city considering adding no parking signs on both sides of Adams from Hawthorne to Guava, and how that will obviously be monitored. We talked a little bit about code enforcement as well. Adams is already lined with cars on both sides as you get closer to Ivy, caused by the landscape company, the pest control company, and the businesses on that corner. So thinking about my family taking simple bike rides down to Town Square are met with unmaintained sidewalks at this time, retaining walls that will no longer hold back the slopes, overgrown trees, shrubs, etc., which is fine for a rural area, but not an urban area. So thinking about how we could potentially revisit the entrance to this community off of Jefferson and not off of Hawthorne or Adams is my potential solution to a lot of these challenges. Thinking about the southwest side of Murrieta, you guys have spoken to that as well, about the look and the feel of the community on that side of town. I live in a neighborhood with a lot of my neighbors here tonight that want to maintain that sense of community in those single-family homes that we have on half-acre parcels that have that community feel and the community vibe.
You have exceeded the 3 minutes, but go ahead, give a few more seconds. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
my last thought is just about the Murrieta Elementary impacts. So we did talk about the school impacts as well. So I have 3 school-age children that are going to ultimately be impacted by the project as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Matthew Murphy.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thank you for everyone and all of your comments so far. So mainly, a couple things, obviously, I live in the Rosecrest development as well. And, to the city, just to echo what Jessica said, I'd like to know what the opportunity is to add no parking from Hawthorne down to at least Brown. That would eliminate the ability for residents to have to police and waste the resources of code enforcement in the city. For the applicant, I'm just curious, who's going to ensure that the property manager will correctly police incoming tenants and who has oversight of this? So just a comment, going back to 7 people in a 3-bedroom apartment, 5 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, and 3 in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's not really a good quality of life. So, if that's what they're aiming for with this project, it's, kind of questionable. So, again, what Jessica said, the location does not offer easy access to shopping or the ability to walk to potential employment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Todd Grimm.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. So I'm also a resident of Rosecrest. Speaking with you guys or listening to things, this is a rural area. We're talking about a 50-foot building on top of probably a 50-foot hill. So from Adams level, you're probably 100 foot at the top of that building. We talked about access onto Hawthorne. To me, that's a public safety issue. You have one ingress, one egress in and out of that position. There's no other way for fire, if you have a mass casualty event, there's no way you would get fire personnel in and people out. The property is all landlocked. There's no way for them to escape other ways at all up there. We talked about watershed. The water coming down Hawthorne will run south, which is basically a dirt shoulder. Just until recently, and all this became aware and people started making complaints, they graded that area, but before that it had about a foot deep trench along that shoulder. So with that, like I said, this is a rural area, this development. The developer, he's there to make money. He wants to keep this development, this building exactly the way it is because they probably put them other places. It's more designed for a college campus area, for a downtown area. That's not what this area is. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Peterson.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, my name is William Peterson. Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for your time. I'm also a resident. Just the last few months, moved down here from the Chino Hills area to the Rosecrest development, just catty corner to this proposed development. I also want to echo like the CEQA, however it's pronounced, that exemption that allows this to be built. Something on the sign that's posted at the top of the hill right now talks about, the parcel being less than 5 acres, and this White's example, blah, but it also says right after that, that it's substantially surrounded by urban areas. That's quote unquote what it says on there, substantially surrounded by urban uses, substantially surrounded by urban uses. If you go back to the photo of the bird's eye view of that property, this is set back on Hawthorne behind single family homes already. There is no apartment building south of Patton that exist. This is all a single family area, and like we all understand that there's apartments, north of us, around town hall area. That's a little more commercial. But once you cross south of Patton, you're in ranch land. I mean, the picture of the property, like I said, jailhouse or dorm room, whatever your take is. I mean, aesthetically, it doesn't match our community at all. I don't know if how familiar you are with the area, but we have cows, we have horses, we have chickens. I mean, I go outside in the morning with a cup of coffee and I hear the rooster. Like, it is a rural area. The other side of Hawthorne is completely unpaved. It's a dirt road. I mean, you can't get any more rural than that. And this is not an urban area. This is not adjacent to an urban area. That all stopped by Patton. If we have no choice, I mean, I'm fully against this and I oppose this. But if we have no choice and it is being, it's going to happen, then we request a redraw of the design. I mean, Town Hall at least has the stone face. At least it's more rustic. I mean, I feel like you're, a camping lodge or ski lodge or something. It's more country. It's more rustic. The craftsman style, like you mentioned. It doesn't fit our area at all. The on-site management to handle the issues in the night, that 24/7 on-site management, they said for emergencies only. I don't, is parking considered an emergency when they're lining up down our block, they're lining up down the neighbor's block, down Adams? There's no curbs along there. People may be parking in the ditches along the sides of the road there. And like you said, there is no consistent sidewalk to get to the schools. My kids already do walk to school on occasion with our au pair, and they have to cross back and forth without crosswalks to make it down Adams. And now we're going to have more people apparently without cars that are going to be commuting or walking to the bus stations to do a commute. We are a commuting city. People are going to have cars, and most likely the jobs are not going to be in Murrieta. Maybe, yeah, I'm sure some of them would be at the 99-cent store or the fast food or the Spectrum, something like that, but they're probably going to go to a different county.
You're 3 minutes up unless you need 10 more seconds.
Yeah, 10 minutes would be great.
Sure.
I think a good solution potentially for this, if we have no other choice, would be to reduce the units to at least improve the ratio of parking spaces. I know you said you were used to do 1-to-1, and this is already better than that. But with the occupancy rate, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's sufficient at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more speakers at this time.
No more speakers, okay. At this time, we would like to allow the applicant for rebuttals on public comment, if you'd like to come up and answer some questions.
Good evening, Commissioners, Honorable Chair, Honorable Vice Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Russell Morse. As you well know, I am an attorney at Myers-Nave. I know it looks like Nave. It's Italian, Myers-Nave. Our offices are located in downtown. We represent CRP, Affordable Housing.
Downtown
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, okay.
Yeah, sorry, forgive me. The applicant for the project. Before I get started and provide some comments on some of the questions that were raised, I want to thank staff for their thorough work and responsiveness for all of the project. They put a lot of work into it, and thank you for protecting your community, because that's what you're here to do. And for having an active community, it's important for the neighborhood, it's important for the community that everybody is involved to try to make the best project possible. I will say that our client put in a lot of work, a lot of extra time with staff in order to try to make this the best project possible. They tried to ensure that the design was, up to snuff and that it was adequate in order to meet requirements. I will say off the bat that under the Housing Accountability Act, which you've all heard about, only objective standards can be applied to a housing development project. This is a housing development project under the Affordable Housing, under the Housing Accountability Act. It is a residential project. It is an affordable housing project, and therefore it receives the protection of the Housing Accountability Act. In such case, a project that qualifies can only be denied by a planning commission with certain conditions, when certain conditions are met, and when those conditions are supported not by substantial evidence, but by a preponderance of evidence provided by the city in written form that the project does not conform to certain preset conditions in the statute. One of those, as you've heard, was if the project has a severe and adverse impact on public health and safety. So those are the only limitations the only conditions under which a city can deny a housing project. I understand we're trying to make the best project here possible, but certain, conditions and requirements, requiring gates, requiring redesign, those are all subjective standards that cannot be applied under the Housing Accountability Act. If you have more questions, I would direct you to your city attorney in order to ask what is subjective, what is objective. I can read you the definition of what an objective standard is. It is a standard that involves no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and something that is uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or the proponent and the public official. So these must be specific code requirements that are set forth that cannot be changed based on one person's opinion one way or the other. So, for example, requiring design changes. Obviously, you say it's a rural community. I understand that. Design changes, requiring gates, those are all subjective standards. With respect to occupancy limits, we need to be really careful about having maximum occupancy limits to, so that you don't run afoul of the Fair Housing Act, which is state law. Again, I would direct you to your city attorney if you have any additional questions regarding the ability of the city to handle that. I will also say that there are certain requirements that the developer will need to follow through with based on the housing department in the city. That will, some of these conditions and requirements that you raised, those are not in the purview of the Planning Commission. Those are housing requirements. Your purview is planning and zoning. So with that, I'm going to try to respond to some of the questions that were raised, some of the issues that were raised by the public. One of the comments first was with respect to the California Environmental Quality Act. That is what is referred to as CEQA. For this project, it received a categorical exemption. That is essentially a set of projects that the state has decided are exempt from review under CEQA because they meet certain criteria. Section 15195 was cited. That unfortunately is the incorrect citation to what the project used. The project used a categorical exemption under section 15332. Staff went into great detail in their report about how the project complies with each component of section 15332. In fact, the applicant went above and beyond what is required in the statute. This binder is literally full of all the reports that the project had to go through in terms to make sure that they are compliant with CEQA, which they actually weren't required to, but tried to in order to show that this was the best project possible. In terms of the building height, it is not 50 feet, it's a maximum of 40 feet. However, that's really just at the top of the parapet. It's really 35 feet in most places. The project has been screened and reviewed by the city, both Public Works, including the fire department, to ensure compliance with fire department access, to ensure that it meets all objective standards. There was a comment about reducing the units in order to make the parking work. I will say that that is a direct violation of the Housing Accountability Act. A planning commission, a city cannot require reduction in the number of units to try to make a project fit into what they want. Again, as staff had told you, the project complies with all objective local development standards, and therefore the options of the city are very limited. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other additional questions you may have.
Okay. Well, we got you up here. I can bring it to the commission for some questions. Commissioner, no? We're good? Commissioner Vrooman, any questions for the applicant?
I appreciate your, telling us, what we can and can't do. I say that sarcastically, but I would like to know if what we're talking about is subject type of stuff like that. You heard, from the residents here, us as well, and maybe what we're asking for is subjective type of stuff. And I think to be a good neighbor and to fit the neighborhood, I really would like to see the applicant come forward with some of the solutions. You mentioned the gates, I've mentioned the gates, the design standard, the look, some of those type of things like that. I think this is an opportunity for you to kind of be a good neighbor, if you will, for everybody here. So with some of the things that were brought up regarding the design, I think that would be, what can you do as opposed to what you can't you do.
Sure, and I understand that, and I do appreciate that the fact that you wanted to. I will say that the applicant did do multiple redesigns of the project as part of the review process. Again, saying I want it to be more rural looking, more country looking, again, that's very subjective. If there are objective standards in terms of articulation, every 30 feet of frontage needs to be cut into and sort of, it doesn't look like a full wall, so that there's a standard that can be applied. Those types of things are applicable. Your staff did say that they're in the process of preparing guidelines. Those will probably be of the objective variety that can be used, that could be applied to future projects. And as the applicant said, he's not opposed to sort of trying to make it, and if it's the color scheme, if it's softening certain edges, they're not opposed to certain modifications that would not revolve around an entire wholesale revision of the project. And lastly, to address your first point, I understand it sounds I'm telling you what to do. This is coming from up top. This is coming from Sacramento. This is state law, and it's state law telling you what to do. I am simply just the messenger to tell you what to do. If there is a problem with Sacramento and their laws, that's for them to deal with.
Again, I just think that there's an opportunity to work with softening things up, whether we can't do it formally, if that's what you're saying that we can't do. I do think there's an opportunity for a handshake agreement, or again, to be a good neighbor. You can still move forward with that.
Absolutely, and the applicant's plans to be a community member for a long time here. These are not short-term projects. These are projects that last for a very long time. They want to be a good neighbor. So they will work with planning staff to try to make these changes to make it into a better project. They will take all of these things into consideration.
And with that, your first impression is a big impression, right? So here we are, we've got neighbors that kind of seems like they've already accepted the fact that this is going to happen, that maybe they cannot block it from happening. But to on a $50 million project, to change the colors of the building and, not saying it's cheap by any standard, but on the scale of the project expense, I think it's doable. I don't think it's out of question to just try to match more of the rural area. If you say that your client has already revised the design multiple times, I'm not talking about the layout. I'm just talking specifically about the look. Right. They definitely didn't consider the surrounding area. Of the residents and the hillside and the plateau and all the things that we have, the things that we love about the west side Murrieta. So, just to kind of echo what we're all saying up here, it would be a nice first impression that, hey, sorry, we're putting this 95 unit structure here in your area of where you live and where you reside, but we're going to try to make it as beautiful as possible.
Sure.
So
and well taken. And if it's a matter of trying to find a color scheme that incorporates more earth tones or something that would sort of work more with the surrounding environment and the undulations of the hills, they will definitely look into trying to work.
I think that's an exact good start in possibly some of the roof lines. I'm not an architectural design. My brother is actually, but I think that would be a good start. So thank you for considering that.
And the only thing I would add to that is you referenced what you just said, future projects and things like that. And I think reputation goes a long way. And I think if you want to play hardball with the city, the community, and you want to say, this is what we're going to do, the next time you come around, or another city or whatever, your reputation is going to be, they're just going to ram something down everyone's throat. And they're not willing to work with the residents and have that. And so I was, as a strong suggestion, I think you need to, whether you work with the residents or come up with some other design standards, because the way it looks right now does not fit that neighborhood.
Right. Your point is well taken over and over again, understood. And if it's a matter of communicating with the neighbors in terms of when construction's going to start, keeping them abreast of what's happening with the project, we can definitely work to try to make those things so that, that they are, like I said, the applicant wants to be a community member. So they were happy to work with the neighbors to try to make it, the best project possible.
Great. Staff has that noted.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Veerman, anything else? Vice Chair Fisher? No comment. Any comment? Just to touch base on a couple other concerns. Let's see here. Public access down Adams. I don't know if this is maybe a question particular to you, but providing safe access for the means of the residents, existing residents and future residents of this development. Are there any off-site improvements that are being done to improve the walking path down Adams, beyond your project footprint?
I'm not aware of any. I will say that, the project has been reviewed by the city departments. There will now be once the project is approved, a building and safety approval process that will have to occur, and the project will comply with, building and safety projects. My guess is city staff could probably address that question better in terms of what additional improvements are required.
I agree. I'll bring that back to staff too. Let's see here. Parking signs is, that might be another staff question, but I mean, are you guys opposed to providing, adequate no parking signs up and down Adams Street?
I think that's also a city question in terms of that.
I agree.
That would be.
Last one, fire access concerns. There was a resident that had fire access concerns. Makes a good point. Maybe this would be a better question for fire, but if there's only one entrance and exit off of Hawthorne, off of Hawthorne, entering your facility, does that meet our policy or our standards for fire?
Again, I think that's a question for your staff to answer.
Okay, and I
because
see
know that
Mr. Schroedermeyer walking up now. Doug, yeah, is there a concern with that? Just, one in, one out, one egress, one ingress?
So we looked at it, and based on the 96 units, if you look at it, one of the things that we required was there's 2 egress lanes. So we're going in when everybody else is going out.
Okay.
So that was how we addressed that, was making sure that they had the ability to get out. That's what we want.
Okay.
People to leave, and we're going in. So
right.
That was addressed and discussed.
And so for the public's, just so they have a clear understanding, this project goes before the fire department and gets full approval. So there's adequate safety, like you just stated.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, as the applicant, I think that's all the questions I have for you too. So thanks for coming up and giving us your time.
Sure, thank you.
But if I could direct a couple of those questions to staff. Let's start with one thing again. Let's just go back to the aesthetics. Is there anything about the view shed that we just talked about a couple commissions ago, or a couple of hearings ago, maybe the last hearing, about this being on top of a hill and then being 40 feet in the air, that it's going to block the view of our ridge lines and things like that we discussed at the last commission?
No, that's a good question. Private view sheds are not protected under the California Environmental Quality Act. If you had a scenic vista, something poignant, like you were looking at the Pacific Ocean from Coast Highway, there are certain designated protected visual areas. We don't have any of that in this neighborhood. But at the same time, when City Council approved the general plan in 1999 and 2011, they took into account these types of concerns. Is they were changing the environment, meaning the stories of height, the types of uses. So when that proposal came to them, that was when we discerned whether there would be an impact, such as visual or community character. We have to be careful there. Community character can be very subjective under state law. So we believe that with the retaining wall, with the landscaping, the setback, because you have an area of landscaping, 18-foot parking space, 26-foot drive lane, 18-foot parking space, and a setback. You'll notice that most of the site is oriented towards the southeast of the area. It has an increased setback away from the northerly property owners and the westerly property owners, which are the single family. So although our intent is not to provide buffering and screening, the design offers that in itself.
And I would add too, the development fits within what we would call the development bubble, right? There's a height that's allowed on the lot. There's setbacks like Jared was just talking about. The proposed buildings are within that development bubble. They could have proposed higher height and more units, as they talked about. An exemption they could go for is height. They could go for a waiver and get more height under the density bonus law. They didn't do that. The development fits within the development bubble that's allowed under the zoning code.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. It just, from my point of view, this, just the sunrise, right? These residents probably have a nice sunrise right now, cresting over the mountains, and this is going to block that for, a period of time. It would just be nice if we can do something. And I get that, the city's hands are tied, and I get that the developer almost has free range and can do these things. So we also appreciate the fact that you would reconsider the design and some of these things, because I think the way I understand you don't have to. But again, to make a good first impression and to, give something back to these residents, like I said, it's not a project that they want. It's a project that they're accepting. I kind of feel like it's the least you could do to just kind of, go through this and redesign some of the elements that would make it aesthetically more pleasing. And I won't talk about that again because I know we have a good understanding about that. But back to staff. Public access down Adams is something I'm real big on too. We've got a lot of, I call it like missing links kind of around Old Town Murrieta, where you've got curb and gutter and sidewalk and safe public access, and then you've got a portion that's rural that's, not going to be developed. I can think coming down Calmia, getting into, on both sides really, as you pass, the veterinarian. You said that there was some funding or some government funding to help bridge that gap for public safety, especially when it comes to kids walking to school. I imagine with the downtown area and with mostly Murrieta Elementary, Murrieta L, being down the street, that there's going to be a high volume of children walking down this. And it would be great if we could bridge that gap. If the developer is not required to do that off-site improvement, I understand, but what can we do about that?
No, actually good timing, because Carl and I and our director recently were threading with Townsend, who goes over grant opportunities with us. There are grants available that we're going to apply for. Some of it is not just with broken or missing gaps in sidewalks, but the lack of shade. So if you look at Calmia over here, we have kids that would walk from the commercial area north by Village Walk all the way down to our elementary school here in the full sun. So what we're thinking about is getting a grant to put a tree-lined street on the sidewalk, because that's what the state is looking for. Is if you give a more conducive environment for a school child, they're more apt to walk to school to do that. But in the summertime, it's 110 sometimes, and it's not very conducive. So I noticed that with our tree canopy on Jefferson, in the heat of August, it's not that bad walking through there. So point well taken. I think we're looking at a number of grants, and that's probably the most important one, because we do have some broken pieces here and there in our area.
And part of going after like a Safe Routes to School grant or something, and some of these other ones, the one Jared's referring to is the Clean California grant, it helps to have the project approved in this location, and then you point to the approved project in your grant application. So without the project, it's more difficult, but with the project, the way it works with the state, with the scoring criteria, would probably help if we have the approved project there.
Okay, understood. We're a little off topic talking about this off-site improvement stuff. I assume this is just kind of something that staff can note. It's not something that has to be included, in the conditions, because it's not a condition.
No, and you can also direct us as part of your action this evening that staff separately will follow up on grant opportunities on behalf of the city as a whole. I think that's fair. So although I've written down what you've said, Chair, if you need to formalize it, no big deal, because I think it's a good point.
If you recall, we did this on the Adams project. There was concern about the crosswalk and that it didn't have a cut at Adams and Ivy. And we did address that after the hearing when the commission asked for that. So yeah, it's something we could look into. I'd just say that staff would appreciate direction to have city staff look into that as part of the review.
Okay. And I don't believe I have, the parking signs. Let's talk about that real quick. Is it something that we can do? Is it acceptable to put no parking signs along Adams? They make a good point. If people are parked there and you're trying to walk your kids to school or whatever you're doing at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning when the cars are still parked there, can we implement that?
Brian Stevens is joining us.
Brian?
So right now, Adams Avenue is classified as a collector roadway, which allows parking along both sides of the street. We do have a couple locations along there that we did put in red curb over the years. One of them is by Patton Avenue. I believe it's a crest vertical curve, and there's a sight distance issue turning out onto Adams. So we put it in there because of a sight distance issue. We also put it in on the east side of the road, north of there a little bit, because the road narrows and there's not enough room for parked vehicles and through traffic without crossing the double yellow. Since then, City Council has adopted a red curb policy of when we can install no parking zones. It's called red curb policy, but it also applies with no parking signs. And I'm going to read to you what the policy states for the first paragraph. The City of Murrieta Municipal Code, Section 10.32.030, authorizes the city traffic engineer to establish the location of no stopping zones and no parking areas. Based on this section of the code, the use of red curb and supplemental signage is used to accomplish one or more of the following, and there's 4. Establish turn lanes, establish vehicle maneuvering zones, establish site clearance zones, and adjacent to schools where such parking would interfere with traffic or create a hazardous situation. So in general, they're installed to improve safety, not to restrict parking of certain vehicles.
So with that being said, though, this is a safety concern because
if there's a safety concern being if a vehicle is exiting from Hawthorne onto Adams and they don't have adequate sight distance to see an oncoming car, then that would be a site clearance zone, and we would put in red curb or no parking signs. To put in no parking signs along Adams Avenue without a site clearance zone or safety issue, we don't have a standard or policy that allows us to do that. Looking at Adams Avenue in this vicinity too, I'm not even sure how far we would go. Typically when we put in red curb or no parking signs, it just forces a problem, if there is a problem, to go further down the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So public access or, that doesn't qualify as a safety concern? I mean,
Public access if there is a sight distance issue that could cause a collision. So what we would do is when this project submits their street improvement plans, we're going to look at the street improvement plans and the siding and striping plan and make sure that the sight triangles are met so that there's adequate sight distance for 45-mile-an-hour speed, which is what the road's posted at. Okay. That's what we're required to do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I believe that's all I have. So at this time, we can close public testimony at 8:52. I guess it's time to call for a motion and a second if we have a general feeling of which way this is going. What's that? I don't know. I don't know if it's more of just like an ask or a favor, but yeah, go ahead.
Let me preface my motion with a statement. I'm reluctantly in favor, and staff, please interrupt me if I'm incorrect, but what I'm being told is the project is exempt from CEQA. The building, and I know you've heard it from me tonight, as ugly as it is, it complies with our design standards. The density complies with HAA, HCA, California law. The parking complies with HAA, HCA, California law. And so based on that, based on the type of project, it's almost, and looking at the report from staff, the conclusion was this is a project that if it's not passed, it's in violation of California law. Is that incorrect anywhere?
That is correct.
Okay. So when, both in my personal or professional life as well as here, one thing I have been sworn to do is to uphold the law. And sometimes upholding the law, it's still a bad result because the brainiacs in Sacramento passed laws that think they should equally apply to all communities without considering each individual community and the uniqueness of the community. And I think certainly this is one of them. And so I find that very frustrating. The other thing I find frustrating is that I think, and I get it, people want to make money, but when you're packing people in like sardine, into sardine cans, when you're shrinking parking to the point where I don't think everybody's going to be able to park there, I just think that's wrong. But if it's legal and you can live with yourself, you can live with yourself. I know that probably most of you here tonight probably live close by the project, and it will have an impact on you, and it's going to impact other people that aren't here tonight. But again, I'm bound by what the law allows and doesn't allow. And from what I've been told in reports, as well as through the city attorney, that yes, this complies in all aspects. So with that being said, I would make a motion to approve, I guess, is it both recommended actions 1 and 2? Recommended actions 1 and 2 with the caveat that CRP provided us with bullet points of what they look for in tenants. And it's interesting because when you look at those bullet points, they're objective. And I think those bullet points also go to public health and safety. When we look at the quality of residents that's going to be occupying this particular project. And when they come in and say, these are the criteria we look at, it's their own criteria. And it is objective. I mean, if someone has received 3 72-hour notices in the past year, that's not subjective. It either happened or it didn't happen. If they wrote 3 or more NSF checks within a period of 1 year, that either happened or it didn't happen. There's no subjectivity involved in this criteria. And I think when you look at it from the standpoint of public health and safety, my motion would be to direct staff to approve recommended actions 1 and 2 subject to entering into an agreement with CRP that would be a recorded agreement that would run with the land, inserting some of the objective criteria that they provided us with. And that'd be my motion to be worked out between staff and the city attorney and CRP.
Do you have a comment?
Just so this commission is aware, I do not think that motion would be legally enforceable should it be approved. They would be requiring, you would be basically conditioning the project upon this agreement being entered into, and that agreement, even though the standards that the commissioner mentioned were objective, they were not clearly identified standards. If we had a code that said that housing developments had to provide these certain objective standards, we might be able to apply that, but we don't.
But these are standards they introduced to us.
And they can voluntarily comply with that, but I don't think we can condition it. That's all I'm saying. Of course, the commission can take whichever direction it wants to go on that path. I just want to make sure that you understand that would be doing exactly what we discussed would be against the Housing Act.
Well, and although I agree with what you're saying, you know, it's Joe, it's I guess we also have to keep the city out of hot water and out of harm's way. So with that, do we want to reconsider the motion?
I don't, but somebody
I'm gonna
doesn't
make
want
a
to second
motion.
it.
I'm going to make a motion.
Under an alternate motion. The motion is still on the floor.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm
there's a
sorry.
second, or you can propose an alternate motion.
No, I'm not going to second it.
Would you like to propose an alternate motion?
I'd like to propose an alternate motion. Or proposal. I'm going to recommend that action one, consider and approve the notice of exemption for infill development, section 15332, pursuant to the guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Act, CICWA. See attachment 2, and number 2, adopt the resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Murrieta approving development plan permit 2022-2601, DP 2022-2601 for a 96-unit multifamily project located northeast of the intersection of Adams Avenue and Hawthorne Street. APNs 900-020-052, 909-020-020, 909-020-021, based on the findings and it's subjected to the conditions of approval in Exhibit A as found in Attachment 1.
I'll go ahead and second that motion. I just wanted to say one thing, because maybe the public didn't see this, but the applicant turned in some data points that showed how properties like this actually increased home values in Orange County, yeah? Those are the ones I'm talking about? So I would just encourage you as this goes down the path, that if this does come to fruition, that you guys crush it, work with these folks, and make this the absolute very best and replicate those data points. So you've got a case that you can say, hey, look what we did in Murrieta. Make sense?
We have a motion and a second. Madam Secretary, please do a roll call vote.
If we can just resolve the first motion, has there been a second on the first motion?
I don't believe so.
Okay,
no.
so that motion fails for lack of a second.
Commissioner Vrooman.
Reluctantly approve.
Your motion.
Commissioner Wojcik.
Nay.
Commissioner Harlan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Fisher.
Aye.
Chair LaPaglia.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously, 5-0.
Correction. I believe one of our commissioners was nay. So I believe the count is 4-1-0, or no, 4-0-1.
4-1-0.
I used the abstention in the middle, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Let's continue. Any city planner comments?
The Planning Commission has rendered a decision this evening on this project. That does open up a 10-day appeal period. If the public is wishing to appeal the project, they can contact myself or come to our front counters for the documentation. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. City Attorney, any comments?
None, thank you.
Back to the Planning Commission. Any further comments before we conclude tonight's hearing? No? Okay.
I just want to thank staff for their time, as well as CRP.
With that, with no further business, may I ask for a concession? And this meeting's now adjourned at 9:02 p.m. I don't believe so. Public testimony has closed. Oh, yeah, you can come up and talk. That was good.
I don't know if it's still there, but.